My name is Catherine. I'm 34 years old, and I've been staying with my mom at our family house ever since my dad died 3 years ago. I decided to stay because I didn't want to leave my mom alone. So I've been here for 3 years now. During this time, some really bad people came to see us. These people were my own brother, Bob, and his wife Jane. I've known Bob since he was born, and Jane has been his girlfriend since they were in middle school. Bob used to bring Jane home during vacations, so I got to know her too. To be honest, I can't forget about those two. They used to bully me just for fun. Both of my parents were usually busy with work, so they weren't around much on weekends. But when they were gone, that's when the bad stuff happened. We lived in a big mansion that my dad, who was a CEO, built for us. But one time, they told me to play hide and seek in the mansion, and when I hid in a closet, my brother and Jane filled it with stuff, trapping me inside. I'd be stuck in there until just before my parents came home, and then my mom would scold me for messing up the closet. One day, my mom came home early from work and caught Bob and Jane stuffing me in the closet and blocking the door. She was really mad. After that, they never locked me in the closet again, but they kept bothering me. I was angry at my parents for not being there when I needed them. I resented Bob and Jane, but I also felt mad at my parents for not helping me. Then, when I was in middle school, Bob and Jane did something really mean. They cut up my school uniform with scissors, wrote all over my textbooks, and even ruined my cushions and bedding. I found out later that Bob and Jane were in high school at the time, and they were angry because they got bad grades on their exams and their parents scolded them. That's probably why they took such a mean revenge on me. I was shocked in my messed up room. Why was this happening to me? Why wouldn't anyone help me? I stood there lost in those thoughts. Then, when I didn't come to dinner, my mom came to check on me and saw my room. She screamed, and my dad came running too. My brother came in last, struggling to hold back his laughter. He couldn't help but chuckle sometimes. Surprised, my parents looked at me as I said, "Mom, Dad, I want to leave this house." Tears started flowing as soon as I spoke. No one is helping me. Bob and Jane are always mean to me together. They've ruined my toys, my school stuff, and my clothes. I don't want to live here anymore. I'm mad at both of you, Dad and Mom. You haven't helped me. It was probably the first time I cried so much in front of my family. Before that, I just quietly endured and cried alone when things were tough. But this time, I cried loudly like a child. Seeing me like that, my mom hugged me and said, "I'm sorry for everything." Even my brother, after seeing how upset I was, seemed to understand how serious it was. He tried to leave, but my dad stopped him. "Do you understand what you've done? This is serious," my father said. Even though he wasn't yelling, his voice was scary, even to me, who wasn't being scolded. "Come on, Dad. It's not like we committed a crime. We were just having some fun," my brother replied. "Destruction of property is a crime. You need to understand that you have to make up for it," my father explained. But Catherine is family, and I'm still young. Minors can't be criminals, can they? My brother protested. My father sighed deeply at my brother's excuse. True, as a minor, you might not have the means to pay. But as parents, we're responsible for your actions. If you can't compensate, we'll have to. It's time for you to go live with your uncle. Uncle? My father's younger brother was known for being strict and disliked dishonesty. He was like a scary figure to the neighborhood kids, similar to a boogeyman. While he was nice to well-behaved children like me, he had no patience for troublemakers like my brother, Bob, and Jane. Bob never got along with him. "No, I don't want to live with Uncle. I promise I'll behave better," my brother begged. "I've heard that promise too many times. When you and Jane locked Catherine in the closet, when you two chased her around, when you threw bugs at her even though you knew she was scared, every time we found out, we scolded you and you always promised to stop. But you kept doing it anyway. We can't have someone in our home who hurts our family, even if they're family themselves. You're not welcome here anymore," my father declared. After my father's declaration, he grabbed Bob by the neck and took him away. Later on, I learned that my parents were really upset with Bob's behavior. Even after being scolded, Bob didn't seem to get why he was in trouble. He just kept bothering me. I figured he was beyond help. Some people just don't understand how to behave in society. I learned that from watching Bob and Jane. Originally, Bob planned to go to university using our father's money after high school. But our father didn't think he'd do well there. He said, You'll just cause trouble for others. So Bob ended up working at our uncle's company right after high school, but he seemed desperate to leave. As soon as he graduated, he and Jane rented an apartment together. They decided to live together without any help from our parents or uncle for rent or expenses. Later on, Bob asked me to lend him some money, even though I was just starting high school and didn't have a job. All the money I had saved up before, which Bob used to steal when he lived with us, was given back to me by my parents. I kept track of it in a notebook. So, I did have money saved, but I wasn't going to give it to him. I told Bob, "Aren't you embarrassed to ask your high school sister for money? I don't even have a job, so I don't have extra money to give you." After that, I told my parents about Bob's request, and they were angry. They'd promised not to help him anymore. I thought Bob and Jane should learn to live on their own without relying on others. From then on, I focused on my studies. I worked hard and went to college. After graduating, I got a job and continued learning new things. I was so busy with my own life that I forgot all about Bob. As I had forgotten about him, an invitation to Bob's wedding arrived at our house. The bride was Jane, of course, his partner. So they're finally tying the knot. I thought as my parents and I discussed whether we should go to the wedding of a family member. However, a few days before the wedding, my father collapsed and was taken away by an ambulance. He had always been frail, but this was the first time he had collapsed, so my mother and I panicked and called for help. During this crisis, I reached out to my brother, but he brushed me off, saying, "I'm getting married soon. Don't bother me during this important time." Even when I told him our father was urgently hospitalized, he dismissed it, saying, "He just tripped, right? Make sure you come to my wedding." Then he hung up. Sadly, our father passed away shortly after. With the funeral arrangements underway, my mother and I informed my brother that we couldn't attend his wedding. Despite his insistence that we should be there, my mother and I decided not to go. We also let Jane's parents know about our father's passing and our inability to attend. While Jane's parents understood, my brother and Jane accused us of disrespect for not attending. The message my mother and I received on our voicemail accusing us of rudeness was so absurd that it made me wonder who the real rude person was. While we were focused on arranging our father's funeral, my brother and Jane went ahead with their wedding without considering our loss. After that, my mother and I never brought it up, but we felt like our relationship with my brother was completely broken. Then, out of nowhere, my brother showed up at our door. When I answered the intercom and he said he had a delivery, I wasn't expecting him to be there in person. When I opened the door, there he was, along with Jane, carrying large suitcases. They'd pushed past me and barged into the house. "Hey, hold on, what's going on?" I protested. It seemed like my brother had forgotten our father's words, who had told him never to come back to our house. Despite that, they both barged in, dropped their luggage in the hallway, and started talking nonsense to me. "You and Mom need to leave this house right now," my brother demanded. "What? Mom has dementia, remember?" I was stunned. What was my brother talking about? It had been 3 years since our father passed away, and he hadn't apologized, visited the grave, or done anything to make amends. And now, he was asking for our family mansion. On top of that, he was assuming our mother had dementia and planning to kick her out. I was left speechless. Then our mother appeared from a room in the back. "Catherine, what's happening?" As she saw my brother, she said something shocking. "Oh, who are you?" "If you're a stranger, please leave," she said. My brother and Jane laughed at her. "See, this happens every time we see her. Her dementia must be getting worse. You take care of Mom. I'll take the mansion. I'm the oldest son, so I should get it," my brother declared as he walked further into the house. Jane, copying my brother, turned to me and our mother and said, "Take the old lady and go. I never want to see you again." I hurried to my mother's side and asked, "Mom, are you all right?" We felt like we were being pushed out, so we left the mansion, leaving all the old furniture behind. My mother and I gathered our things and left the house. Luckily, a friend of mine who heard about our situation offered us his house. He was overseas and couldn't take care of it himself. Originally, his cousin looked after the house, but since he's moving to another state next year, it seemed like a good opportunity for us. When we arrived at the house and unpacked, my mother and I finally felt relieved. Then my mother chuckled and said, "We've left that house, but I still don't like how Bob and Jane behave. Maybe we should sell the house," she suggested. I asked my mother about what Bob said regarding her having dementia. She explained, "That's just a story they made up. About 2 years ago they started asking me for money all the time, but they didn't even attend their father's funeral. And they never bothered to check on me afterward." I couldn't believe their audacity to ask for money after all they'd done, so every time they asked, I pretended not to know them and said, "Who? I don't know you. You're a stranger to me, right?" "Oh, I understand now," I remarked. It seemed Bob and Jane misinterpreted my mother's deliberate distance and treated her like a stranger because she wanted nothing to do with them anymore. They thought her indifference meant she genuinely didn't remember them, leading them to believe she had dementia. Regardless, I believed it was wrong to kick someone out of their home, especially if they thought they had dementia. My mother quickly decided to sell the mansion. We'd have been discussing selling it ever since my father passed away, as it was too big for just the two of us. At that time, an executive from my father's company, where I was being trained as a successor, expressed interest in buying it. So the buyer was almost certain. We just needed to go through the paperwork. When I spoke to a real estate contact and explained the situation to the executive, they agreed that leaving the mansion with Bob and Jane would lead to serious problems. It was clear that action needed to be taken swiftly. A week later, our phones wouldn't stop ringing. Bob called my mother while Jane called me repeatedly. They probably wanted to tell us the same thing, but we found it amusing and decided to ignore them for 30 minutes and just enjoy our tea. As we chatted, an hour passed without us realizing it, and it seemed like Bob and Jane had been trying to reach us the whole time. When I finally answered Jane's call, she exclaimed, "Finally. Why didn't you answer sooner? There's a big problem. The house has been taken over." "Wait, didn't you two take over the house?" "I think it says who should be saying that we've been taken over," I retorted. "No, Bob and I were living in this mansion, but now some strangers have shown up and are demanding that we leave. They just barged in and are trying to kick us out. Our mansion has been taken over," she exclaimed. I couldn't help but burst out laughing. I really wanted to remind her that they were the ones who invaded the house in the first place and were unlawfully occupying it. Chuckling a bit, I replied, "You're talking about being taken over, but you're not even the legal owners. My mother, who was the rightful owner, has sold the house to someone else. So strangers who have no connection to the property should quickly move out." "What? She sold it? This mansion?" She sounded shocked. "But this mansion belongs to Bob," she protested. "When did anyone ever say that?" I questioned. "Well, no one explicitly said it, but Bob is the eldest son. Isn't it natural for him to eventually inherit this house, the property, and his dad's company? And I'll be living as the elegant wife of the CEO in this mansion," Jane argued. Despite her confidence, Jane seemed panicked. I couldn't help but burst out laughing again. The fact that she assumed Bob would automatically inherit the mansion and become the CEO of the company his father ran was astonishing. Such naive thinking, I thought to myself. Given Jane's strong belief, Bob probably also thought he would inherit both the mansion and the company, even though no one had ever promised him that. Once more, I couldn't help but laugh at Jane's words. "Bob is the boss, and you're his wife? How can you even think that's possible? You both started at the company without any special training or education to run it," I chuckled. Jane seemed surprised by my teasing. She shot back, "Well, I might inherit the company from my uncle then." I laughed even harder. "You should check the company news first. And about my uncle's business, his cousin's son is already running it." "What? So Bob can't be CEO, and I can't be a CEO's wife?" Jane couldn't believe it. "That's right. Can I hang up now?" "I don't think I need to talk to strangers anymore," I said. "Please, Catherine, wait. Can you give us some money?" Jane pleaded. I hung up the call, but later I heard what happened next from Uncle. Bob and Jane didn't want to leave the mansion. They clung to the pillars and refused to go. Uncle had to come and pick them up. It turns out, since they were hired by Uncle's company, they were undergoing strict training, and they were so scared that they cried when Uncle took them away. They were taken to a mountain retreat owned by one of Uncle's friends because they were too unpredictable on their own. Uncle warned them that if they didn't behave at the retreat, they'd be stuck there forever. Despite this, they tried to escape multiple times but got caught every time. Meanwhile, the person who was supposed to manage the house was my fiancé, who's currently working abroad. I'm living in his parents' house now. He's planning to come back home this year, so we'll start planning our wedding soon. My mother and uncle who helped us will be invited to the wedding, but Bob and Jane won't be invited.
The shrill ringing of my phone jolted me awake from a deep slumber. Instinctively, I reached for it, squinting at the caller ID. Micah. A knot formed in my stomach as I answered, bracing myself for the worst. Mom, I'm so sorry to call this late, but I need to ask you something important. Micah's voice trembled. Can you please increase my allowance? Living on $10 a month is impossible. My heart sank as confusion washed over me. $10 a month? Micah, that can't be right. I've been depositing $200 every month into your account without fail. Silence hung heavy between us, punctuated only by Micah's shaky breaths. Mom, I don't know what to say. I've been struggling to make ends meet, working odd jobs just to afford basic necessities. Guilt and determination surged within me. Stay put, honey. I'll be right there. I ended the call and scrambled to get ready, my mind racing with unanswered questions. The drive to Micah's apartment seemed endless, each red light amplifying my worry. When I finally arrived, the sight that greeted me was gut-wrenching. My son, once vibrant and full of life, now appeared gaunt and hollow-eyed, his tiny studio apartment devoid of warmth. Micah, I choked back tears, enveloping him in a tight embrace. Why didn't you tell me things were this bad? He clung to me, his body trembling. I didn't want to burden you, Mom. You work so hard already. Anger bubbled up inside me, directed at whoever was responsible for this injustice. I immediately withdrew a substantial amount of cash from the nearest ATM, pressing it into Micah's hands. This should tide you over for now. I promise we'll get to the bottom of this mess. As I held my son close, determination burned within me. Someone had betrayed our trust, and I would stop at nothing to uncover the truth and make things right again. After the initial shock of seeing Micah's living conditions, I wasted no time. We bundled up and drove straight to my place, my mind consumed with outrage and determination to solve this injustice. As soon as we stepped inside, I ushered Micah to the kitchen and whipped up a hearty meal, watching him devour it ravenously. Each mouthful seemed to breathe life back into his sunken cheeks, and a glimmer of hope flickered in his eyes. Once he'd finished, I poured us both a glass of water and sat across from him, steeling myself for the tough conversation ahead. Micah, I need you to tell me everything. When did you first notice something was off with your allowance? He took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the table. A few months ago, the deposits just stopped coming. At first, I thought it might be a glitch or a missed payment, but when it kept happening, I knew something was seriously wrong. Anger coiled inside me like a viper, ready to strike. And you never thought to let me know? Honey, you should have come to me sooner. Micah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. I didn't want to add to your stress, Mom. You work such long hours at the hospital. I thought I could handle it on my own, but... His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. Instinctively, I reached across the table and gripped his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. It's going to be okay, Micah. We'll figure this out together. He nodded, visibly trying to compose himself. I've been taking any job I can find, waiting tables, delivering food, even tutoring, but it's never enough to cover rent, utilities, and basic expenses. White-hot rage coursed through my veins at the thought of my son, my brilliant, hard-working son, being forced to sacrifice his education and well-being because of someone else's deceit. Pushing away from the table, I paced the kitchen, my mind racing. Micah, I want you to pack a bag and stay here with me until we resolve this mess. No arguments, I added firmly, cutting off his protests. And first thing tomorrow, I'm going to have a little chat with your father. The mere thought of confronting Jake twisted my stomach into knots, but I couldn't back down now. Not when my son's future was on the line. If Jake was behind this, he would face the full force of my wrath, and I wouldn't stop until justice was served. After ensuring Micah was settled in the guest room, I marched straight into the bedroom I shared with Jake, determination fueling my every step. He was lounging on the bed, mindlessly flipping through channels on the TV. Jake, we need to talk. Now. My tone brooked no argument. He glanced up, his brow furrowed in confusion. What's got you so riled up? I took a deep breath, struggling to keep my anger in check. Care to explain why our son has been living like a pauper for months while you've been pocketing the money I've been sending him? Jake's eyes widened, and he sat up straighter. Whoa, slow down. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, I snapped. Micah called me in tears tonight, saying he's been surviving on scraps because his allowance stopped coming through. A flicker of guilt crossed Jake's face before it hardened into a mask of indifference. So you finally gave him his allowance? About time. Don't forget next month. His cavalier attitude was like a slap in the face, and I saw red. What is wrong with you? Our son has been struggling to afford basic necessities, and you're acting like it's no big deal? Jake rolled his eyes, rising from the bed. Don't be so dramatic, Emma. He's a grown man. He can take care of himself. His dismissive tone ignited a fury within me I'd never experienced before. I stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. This behavior is unacceptable, Jake. You're his father, for God's sake. How could you let this happen? For a moment, he seemed taken aback by my intensity. But then his expression contorted into a sneer that chilled me to the bone. Back off, Emma. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Before I could respond, my gaze fell upon a glittering object on the nightstand. A gaudy, decorative keychain I'd never seen before. A sick feeling settled in the pit of my stomach as I realized this keepsake didn't belong to either of us. Jake followed my line of sight and quickly snatched up the keychain, shoving it into his pocket. But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted. Where did you get that? I demanded, my voice low and dangerous. Jake's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. It's nothing, just a little gift for myself. Lies. More lies. The betrayal stung like acid, searing through the very fabric of our marriage vows. In that moment, I knew. I couldn't trust a word that came out of his mouth. My husband, the man I'd loved and built a life with, was hiding something sinister, and I wouldn't rest until I uncovered every last sordid detail. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained and disoriented, as if the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a twisted nightmare. But the empty space beside me in bed was a harsh reminder that this was my new reality. Pushing aside the blankets, I padded into the living room, where Micah was already up, clutching a mug of coffee like a lifeline. Morning, honey, I greeted, forcing a smile. Did you sleep okay? He nodded silently, his eyes haunted. We both knew there was an elephant in the room, a looming confrontation that could shatter what remained of our family. Swallowing hard, I reached for my phone. I'm going to call your Uncle Mark. He works at the bank. Maybe he can shed some light on what's going on with your accounts. Relief washed over Micah's face, and he visibly relaxed. Mark had always been a steady, trustworthy presence in our lives, the polar opposite of his brother Jake. Within the hour, Mark arrived at our doorstep, pulling me into a comforting hug before greeting Micah warmly. So, fill me in on what's happening, he said, his brow furrowed with concern. I launched into an explanation, laying out the facts as calmly as I could, but as the words tumbled out, anger and hurt seeped into my tone. Mark listened patiently, nodding along. That doesn't sound like Jake at all, he mused. Let me look into Micah's accounts and see if there are any discrepancies. While Mark made some calls, I busied myself in the kitchen, trying to keep my mind occupied. But it was no use. A nagging voice in the back of my head kept whispering that something was very, very wrong. Finally, Mark emerged, his expression grave. Emma, you're not going to like this. My heart plummeted as he explained that there were, in fact, 2 accounts listed under Micah's name. A primary account that I was depositing into, and a secondary one that had been draining funds for months. But how is that possible? I demanded, struggling to make sense of it all. Mark's jaw tightened. Jake set up the second account without your knowledge. He's been siphoning money from the primary into that separate fund. White-hot rage surged through me, quickly followed by a wave of icy betrayal. Jake had been lying to me all along, stealing from our own son for God knows what reason. That bastard, I hissed, slamming my fist onto the counter. Micah flinched, his eyes wide with worry. Mark placed a calming hand on my shoulder. I know this is a lot to take in, but we need to stay focused and get to the bottom of this. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I nodded. You're right. Do you think we should hire a private investigator to dig deeper and find out what Jake's really been up to? The words tasted bitter on my tongue, but I knew it was the only way. If Jake was leading a double life, I needed to uncover every last sordid detail, no matter how painful it might be. As Mark made arrangements, I pulled Micah aside, my heart aching for the turmoil he'd endured. "I'm so sorry you got caught up in this mess, honey," I murmured, cupping his face in my hands. "But I promise you, we're going to make things right. Your dad is going to face the consequences of his actions." Micah nodded solemnly, his eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and resolve. In that moment, I vowed to myself that I would stop at nothing to protect him, even if it meant unleashing the full force of my wrath on the man I once loved. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and anticipation as we waited for the private investigator to uncover Jake's secrets. The uneasy silence that lingered in our home was suffocating, punctuated only by the occasional reassuring squeeze of Micah's hand. Finally, the investigator requested to meet us, promising he had uncovered crucial information. Mark offered to join us for moral support, and we convened at a local diner, our nerves frayed. The investigator wasted no time getting to the point. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid the news I have is disturbing, to say the least." My heart pounded in my ears as he continued. "Your husband, Jake, has been involved in an extramarital affair for quite some time now, with a woman named Sasha, nearly 15 years his junior." A collective gasp rippled through our group, but the investigator pressed on, his expression grim. "That's not all. It appears Jake has been funneling money, your son's allowance, to be precise, into a separate account, which he then used to lavish expensive gifts and nights out on this Sasha." My vision blurred with hot, angry tears as the pieces finally clicked into place. The secret bank account, the unexplained keepsake, Jake's hostility, it all made sense now. He had been cheating on me, stealing from our own child to fund his sordid double life. "That low-life scumbag," Mark snarled, his hands curled into tight fists. "How could he do this to his own family?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat, choked by the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Instead, I turned to Micah, who sat frozen in stunned silence, his face drained of color. "Honey, I'm so sorry," I rasped, reaching across the table to grasp his hand. "None of this is your fault." Micah blinked rapidly, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I can't believe Dad would. How could he?" His voice trailed off, and in that moment I felt a surge of white-hot rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. Jake had not only shattered the sacred vows of our marriage, but had also inflicted unimaginable pain on our son, the one person who should have been able to trust him implicitly. Squeezing Micah's hand tightly, I turned to the investigator with a steely resolve. "Thank you for your work on this. I know exactly what needs to be done now." As we stood to leave, Mark pulled me aside, his expression a mixture of concern and support. "Emma, whatever you decide to do next, I've got your back. That snake doesn't deserve a shred of mercy after what he's put you both through." I nodded, my jaw set in grim determination. Jake's web of lies and deceit had finally been exposed, and there would be no escape from the reckoning that awaited him. It was time to gather our families and face him head-on, leaving no room for excuses or manipulation. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the chance to unleash the full force of my wrath and ensure that Jake faced the consequences of his despicable actions. And as Micah and I walked out into the warm afternoon sun, I silently vowed that justice would be served, no matter what it took. The air was thick with tension as our families gathered in the living room, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. Jake sat apart from the group, his face a mask of forced nonchalance that did little to conceal the anxiety simmering beneath the surface. As I paced before them, clutching the damning evidence in my trembling hands, an eerie hush fell over the room. All eyes were fixed on me, awaiting the bombshell I was about to drop. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. "I've called you here today because it's time Jake's deceit and betrayal were brought to light." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd, but a sharp look from my father quickly silenced them. Squaring my shoulders, I turned to face Jake head-on. "Jake, you've been having an affair with a woman named Sasha, and to fund your sordid little tryst, you've been stealing from our son, Micah, embezzling the money I've been sending him for his allowance and living expenses." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, Jake's expression remained impassive. But then, his mask began to crack, twisting into a sneer of defiance. "You've got no proof of any of that," he spat, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking an ally. But I was ready, brandishing the stack of evidence like a weapon. "Oh, but I do. Bank statements, receipts for expensive gifts and hotel stays, all traced back to you and your little mistress." Jake's face drained of color as I methodically laid out every sordid detail, leaving no room for doubt or excuses. Beside me, Micah sat rigid, his hands clenched into tight fists as the full extent of his father's betrayal sank in. As the last damning piece of evidence was revealed, a hush fell over the room, punctuated only by the sound of Jake's ragged breathing. It was as if the air had been sucked out, leaving us all gasping for oxygen in the wake of such staggering deception. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A petite woman with heavily made-up features slinking towards the center of the room. Sasha, the woman who had so callously inserted herself into our lives and torn our family apart. Well, it seems the jig is up," she purred, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she sidled up to Jake. "Did you really think you could keep me a secret forever, darling?" Jake recoiled from her touch, his face contorted in a mixture of anger and shame. "Sasha, what are you doing here?" But she merely laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, Jake, you're just too easy. Did you really think I loved you? That this was anything more than a means to an end?" The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of my mother's muffled sobs. Jake sat frozen, his mouth hanging open in a twisted parody of shock and anguish. You used me?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sasha rolled her eyes, examining her perfectly manicured nails with a bored expression. "Of course I did, you idiot. Did you really think a woman like me would settle for a pathetic loser like you if there wasn't something in it for me?" Her words cut deeper than any knife, and I could see the fight draining from Jake's body with every venomous syllable. In that moment, he was utterly broken. A shell of the man I had once loved, stripped bare by the very woman he had sacrificed everything for. As Sasha sauntered out, leaving a trail of devastation in her wake, an eerie silence descended upon the room. Jake remained motionless, his gaze fixed on some distant point as the weight of his actions finally came crashing down around him. It was over. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no turning back. All that remained was to pick up the pieces and begin the long, arduous process of healing. A journey that would test the limits of our strength and resolve, but one that we would undertake together, united in our determination to overcome the betrayal that had nearly torn us apart. The silence that hung in the air was suffocating, broken only by the occasional muffled sob or sharp intake of breath. Jake sat hunched in his chair, his head cradled in his hands as the full weight of his deception bore down upon him. Beside me, Micah shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenched tight as he struggled to process the avalanche of revelations. I reached out and gave his hand a reassuring squeeze, drawing strength from his presence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake lifted his head, his eyes rimmed with unshed tears. "Emma, His voice cracked and he swallowed hard. "I don't know what to say." The apology died on his lips as my father abruptly rose from his seat, his face thunderous. "Save it, Jake," he growled. "Your actions speak louder than any words ever could." Jake flinched as if he'd been physically struck, his gaze dropping to the floor in shame. Seizing the opportunity, I stepped forward, unfurling the divorce papers I'd had drawn up. "These are standard divorce proceedings," I stated, my tone clipped and businesslike. "You'll also be responsible for compensating Micah for the full amount you embezzled from his accounts, plus interest." A collective murmur rippled through the room, but I held up a hand, silencing them. "I'm also seeking additional damages for the emotional turmoil and distress you've put us through." Jake's head snapped up, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Emma, you can't be serious." But I was deadly serious. This man, this stranger who had once been my husband, had shattered our family's trust in the most despicable way imaginable. He deserved no mercy, no second chances. "Sign the papers, Jake," I said, my voice laced with steel. "It's the only way to begin making amends for what you've done." For a long moment he simply stared at me, as if willing me to back down or offer him a lifeline. But when none came, his shoulders slumped in defeat. With trembling hands, he reached for the pen and scrawled his signature across the dotted line, sealing his fate. As the papers were shuffled and handed off to my lawyer, a heavy silence descended upon the room once more. Jake remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as the weight of his actions finally sank in. It was then that a commotion erupted from the hallway, the unmistakable sounds of angry shouting and scuffling. Before anyone could react, Sasha burst through the door, her perfectly coiffed hair in disarray and makeup smeared. "You lying, cheating scumbag!" she screeched, her eyes wild and accusing as she zeroed in on Jake. "You told me you were some hotshot CEO, not some washed-up loser living off his wife's income." Jake recoiled as if he'd been struck, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly as Sasha advanced on him, her manicured nails bared like claws. "I can't believe I let you touch me, let alone waste my time and money on you," she spat, her words dripping with venom. "You're nothing but a pathetic, spineless excuse for a man." With each blistering insult, Jake seemed to shrink further into himself, his facade of bravado crumbling under the onslaught of Sasha's fury. As the rest of us looked on in stunned silence, Sasha whirled on her heel and stormed out, leaving a trail of destruction in her wake. Jake remained frozen, his eyes glassy and unfocused, as if he'd finally glimpsed the depths of his own depravity. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of pity wash over me. This broken, pathetic shell of a man was barely recognizable as the person I had once loved and built a life with. His betrayal had been unforgivable, but in the end, he was the architect of his own downfall. A cautionary tale of what happens when greed and lust are allowed to fester unchecked. As my family members began to disperse, offering murmured words of support and consolation, I turned to Micah, my heart swelling with a renewed sense of purpose. "It's over," I said softly, brushing a stray tear from his cheek. "Your dad's lies and deceit have finally caught up to him. Now it's time for us to start fresh, to rebuild and move forward, stronger than ever before." Micah nodded, his expression a mix of sadness and determination. We had endured the unimaginable, but our bond had only grown stronger in the face of such adversity. As we turned and walked out into the crisp evening air, I knew that while the road ahead would be long and challenging, we would tackle it together, side by side, a united front, forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by an unshakable resilience that no force on earth could break. In the weeks that followed, Jake's world unraveled at a dizzying pace. The fallout from his sordid affair and financial misdeeds proved to be a maelstrom from which there was no escape. My lawyer wasted no time in pursuing the compensation and damages outlined in the divorce papers. With irrefutable evidence of his embezzlement and betrayal, Jake had no choice but to comply, a fact that left him seething with impotent rage. "This is highway robbery," he raged one day, slamming his fist on the table as we finalized the transfer of funds to cover Micah's losses. "You're bleeding me dry, Emma." I leveled him with an icy glare, unfazed by his outburst. "You brought this on yourself, Jake? Consider this a mere fraction of the price you'll pay for your despicable actions." His face flushed an ugly shade of crimson, but he knew better than to argue. With each dollar he was forced to relinquish, I could see the fight draining from his eyes, replaced by a weary resignation. As if the financial burden wasn't enough, Jake's professional life soon crumbled as well. News of his infidelity and fraudulent activities quickly spread through the company grapevine, and before long he found himself unceremoniously dismissed. A disgraced pariah in the industry he had once thrived in. "They can't do this to me," he blustered, pacing the living room in a frenzy. "I built that company from the ground up. Those ungrateful bastards owe me." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The corporate world had no tolerance for the kind of moral bankruptcy he had displayed, and he soon found himself blacklisted, his once promising career reduced to ashes. As Jake's life spiraled further into disarray, Sasha wasted no time in cutting her losses and fleeing town, her appetite for drama and chaos finally sated. But not before my legal team ensured she faced the consequences of her actions, too. "You really thought you could just waltz in, ruin my family, and walk away scot-free?" I challenged her during one particularly heated confrontation. Sasha merely shrugged, examining her perfectly manicured nails with a bored expression. "It was fun while it lasted, I guess. But Jake was never really my type. Too clingy, too desperate. Her callous indifference was maddening, but I refused to let her get under my skin. Well, I hope you enjoyed your little game, because you're about to pay the price. True to my word, Sasha found herself embroiled in a legal quagmire that left her finances in tatters. Any ill-gotten gains she had acquired through her dalliance with Jake were swiftly clawed back, leaving her to slink away in disgrace, her reputation in ruins. As the dust settled and a sense of normalcy began to return, I found myself reflecting on the tumultuous journey that had brought us to this point. The road had been paved with heartbreak and betrayal, but we had emerged from the flames tempered and stronger than ever before. Micah, in particular, seemed to thrive in the aftermath of his father's downfall. With the financial burden lifted and a renewed sense of purpose, he poured himself into his studies, ultimately landing a coveted job at a prestigious firm upon graduation. As for me, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had stared down the face of adversity and emerged victorious, my unwavering determination to protect my family proving to be an unbreakable force. And yet, amid the triumphs and hard-won victories, there was still a lingering ache, a reminder of the love and trust that had been so callously shattered. Jake's actions had left scars that would never fully heal, a constant reminder of the fragility of the bonds we once thought unbreakable. But as I watched Micah thriving in his new life, surrounded by a supportive network of friends and colleagues, I knew that we had weathered the storm. We had faced the darkness head-on and emerged into the light, our resilience and love for one another shining brighter than ever before. And in that moment, I silently vowed to never lose sight of the hard-won wisdom we had gained. That true strength lies not in the absence of adversity, but in the courage to face it head-on and emerge stronger on the other side. The call comes just as I'm about to head out for my morning jog. Theo's voice on the other end of the line is calm, almost nonchalant, as if he's informing me about the weather. Lillian feels the empty nest at home. She's moving in next week. I nearly dropped my phone. Excuse me. When was this decided? Last night. Mom's been struggling since Dad passed, and I think it's best if she's with family. And you didn't think to discuss this with me first? I can feel my blood pressure rising. Marin, she's my mother. Where else is she supposed to go? That's not the point, Theo. We're supposed to be a team. You can't just make unilateral decisions like this. Look, it's just for a little while until she gets back on her feet. It won't be that bad. But I know better. I've seen how Theo gets around his mother, how he transforms from the man I married into a docile little boy, eager to please. I take a deep breath, trying to quell the panic rising in my chest. Fine, we'll talk about this when I get home. Great. Love you. I don't respond, just end the call and stare at my phone. This isn't the first time Theo has made a major decision without me, but it's definitely the most egregious. I think back to our wedding day, how Lillian had insisted on controlling every detail, from the guest list to the color of the napkins. I had chalked it up to typical mother-of-the-groom behavior, but now I see it for what it was, a sign of things to come. I start my jog, my feet pounding against the pavement as my mind races. How am I supposed to deal with Lillian living under my roof? The woman who constantly criticizes my cooking, my decorating choices, my career. I think about the inheritance my grandmother left me, the money I had been saving for a down payment on a house of our own. With Lillian moving in, that dream feels further away than ever. By the time I get back home, I'm drenched in sweat and no closer to a solution. Theo is already at work, so I'm left to my own devices as I try to figure out how to accommodate our new house guest. I start by clearing out the guest room, boxing up the exercise equipment and craft supplies that have accumulated over the years. As I'm doing so, I come across a photo album from our wedding. I flip through the pages, my eyes landing on a picture of Theo and Lillian dancing together, identical smiles on their faces. It hits me then, the realization that I will always be an outsider in my own marriage, that Theo will always put his mother's needs before my own. I close the album and shove it back into the box, my jaw clenched tight. Something has to change. I can't keep living like this, constantly playing second fiddle to a woman who doesn't even like me. I finish clearing out the room and head to the kitchen to start on dinner. As I chop vegetables, my mind churns with the beginnings of a plan. I may not be able to stop Lillian from moving in, but I'll be damned if I let her take over my life. The memories of our wedding day flood back as I sit at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but even then, the cracks were starting to show. I remember Lillian's disapproving frown as she surveyed the reception hall, her eyes lingering on the simple centerpieces I had chosen. "Are you sure this is what you want, dear? It's a bit quaint." I had forced a smile, determined not to let her ruin my big day. "It's perfect, Lillian, just what Theo and I wanted." But even as I said the words, I could feel Theo's hand tighten on my arm, a silent warning to play nice. Looking back, I can see how Theo's charming facade had blinded me to his true nature. The way he would dismiss my opinions with a laugh and a pat on the head, as if I were a child. The way he would always defer to his mother's wishes, no matter how unreasonable. I take a sip of my coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood. I had thought marriage would be a partnership, but instead I find myself playing the role of a subordinate, constantly bowing to the whims of my husband and his mother. The sound of the front door opening jolts me out of my thoughts. Theo strides into the kitchen, his suit impeccably pressed and his hair perfectly coiffed. He looks every inch the successful investment broker, but I know the truth behind the polished exterior. "How was your day, honey?" he asks, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "Fine," I reply, my voice clipped. "Just trying to figure out where to put all of Lillian's things." Theo's smile falters for a moment before he recovers. "I'm sure we'll find a place for everything. Mom's not bringing that much." I bite back a scoff. I've seen the moving trucks parked outside Lillian's house, the endless stream of boxes and furniture being loaded up. And where exactly are we supposed to put it all, Theo? This house isn't big enough for 3 people and a lifetime's worth of possessions. Theo's eyes narrow, his voice taking on an edge. "We'll make it work, Marin. Mom needs us right now." "And what about what I need?" I ask, my voice rising. "What about our plans for the future, the house we were going to buy?" Theo slams his hand down on the counter, making me jump. "Damn it, Marin. Can't you think of anyone but yourself for once? My mother just lost her husband. She needs her family." I stare at him, stunned by the outburst. In all our years together, I've never seen Theo lose his temper like this. "I am thinking of our family, Theo, but right now it feels like you're only thinking of yours." Theo takes a deep breath, his jaw clenched tight. "I don't have time for this. I have to go pick up Mom." He grabs his keys off the counter and storms out of the house, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I sink back into my chair, my head in my hands. How did we get here? How did I let things get so out of control? But even as I ask myself the questions, I know the answer. I let Theo and Lillian steamroll over me, too afraid of rocking the boat to stand up for myself. Well, no more. I may not be able to stop Lillian from moving in, but I won't let her dictate my life. I won't let Theo treat me like a doormat any longer. I take a deep breath and stand up, my resolve hardening with each passing second. It's time to take back control of my life, one way or another. The next few days are a whirlwind of activity as I prepare for Lillian's arrival. I clean the house from top to bottom, rearrange furniture to make room for her belongings, and stock the fridge with all of her favorite foods. But no matter how much I do, it never seems to be enough. "This room is awfully small," Lillian sniffs as I show her the guest room, "and the decor is so bland." I bite my tongue, reminding myself that she's just lost her husband. "I thought we could go shopping for some new bedding and curtains, make it feel more like home." Lillian waves a dismissive hand. "I suppose that will have to do, for now." As the days go by, Lillian's presence in the house becomes increasingly suffocating. She criticizes everything from the way I load the dishwasher to the way I fold the towels. She rearranges my kitchen cabinets and moves my furniture without asking. But the final straw comes when I overhear her talking to Theo one evening. "Really, Theodore, I don't know how you stand it," she says, her voice dripping with disdain. "Living in this tiny house with a wife who can't even keep it properly decorated." I feel my blood boil as Theo's response floats down the hallway. "I know, Mom, but what can I do?" Marin is stubborn. "You need to put your foot down," Lillian insists. "Take control of the situation. You're the man of the house, after all." I can't listen to any more. I storm into the living room, my eyes blazing with anger. How dare you? I hiss at Lillian. This is my home, and you have no right to come in here and start making demands. Lillian looks at me with a smirk. Oh, please, this isn't a home, it's a shoebox, and you, my dear, are hardly qualified to be running it. I turn to Theo, expecting him to defend me, but he just stands there, his eyes fixed on the floor. Theo? I prompt, my voice shaking. Are you going to let her talk to me like that? Theo finally looks up, his expression unreadable. Marin, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stare at him in disbelief. Harder than it needs to be? Your mother just insulted me in my own home, and you're taking her side? I'm not taking anyone's side, Theo argues. I just think we all need to calm down and find a way to make this work. I shake my head, hot tears stinging my eyes. I can't believe this. I can't believe you. I turn and flee the room, slamming the bedroom door behind me. I sink down onto the bed, my body shaking with sobs. How did I let things get this bad? How did I let Theo and Lillian walk all over me for so long? But even as I wallow in self-pity, a small voice in the back of my mind whispers that it's not too late, that I can still take back control of my life. I think of the inheritance my grandmother left me, the money I had been saving for our future. I think of how Theo had promised we would use it to buy a house of our own, start a family. But now, with Lillian living under our roof and Theo catering to her every whim, that future seems further away than ever. I wipe my eyes and take a deep breath, my resolve hardening. I won't let them take that away from me. I won't let them dictate how I live my life. I reach for my phone and dial a number I never thought I would need. Hello, I say when the receptionist answers. I need to speak with a lawyer. It's about my husband. The meeting with the lawyer is eye-opening, to say the least. I sit in his office, my hands clasped tightly in my lap as he looks over the documents I've brought with me. It seems your husband has been less than forthcoming about his financial situation, the lawyer says, his brow furrowed. Based on these bank statements, his investments are not nearly as lucrative as he's led you to believe. I feel a sinking sensation in the pit of my stomach. What do you mean? The lawyer sighs, leaning back in his chair. Mrs. Bridges, I believe your husband has been using your inheritance to fund his mother's lifestyle. The money he claims to be investing is actually being funneled into her accounts. I stare at him in shock, my mouth hanging open. That can't be true. Theo wouldn't do that to me. The lawyer gives me a sympathetic look. I'm afraid the evidence suggests otherwise. Your husband has been systematically draining your joint accounts for months. I feel like I've been punched in the gut. All this time, I thought Theo and I were working towards a common goal, a future together. But now I see that he's been lying to me, using me for my money. I think back to all the times he's dismissed my concerns about our finances, telling me not to worry, that he had everything under control. How could I have been so blind? I leave the lawyer's office in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of what I've learned. When I get home, I find Theo and Lillian in the living room, sipping tea and chatting like old friends. Marin, there you are, Theo says, his voice all false cheer. I was just telling Mom about our plans for the weekend. I feel a surge of anger course through me. What plans, Theo? The ones where you take more of my money to fund your mother's shopping sprees? Theo's face goes white, his eyes widening in shock. What are you talking about? I throw the bank statements down on the coffee table. I'm talking about how you've been lying to me, stealing from me, using my inheritance to pay for your mother's extravagant lifestyle. Lillian scoffs, rolling her eyes. Don't be so dramatic, Marin. Theo is just being a good son, taking care of his family. I whirl on her, my eyes blazing. Taking care of his family? By stealing from his wife? By betraying my trust? Theo stands up, his hands held out in a placating gesture. Marin, please let me explain. But I'm done listening to his excuses. Explain what, Theo? How you've been using me all these years? How you never really loved me at all? Theo's face hardens, his voice growing cold. Don't be ridiculous. Of course I love you. But Lillian is my mother. I have to take care of her. I shake my head, tears streaming down my face. No, Theo, you have to take care of your wife. You have to be honest with me, respect me. But you've done none of those things. I turn to leave, but Theo grabs my arm. Marin, wait, we can work this out. I yank my arm away, my voice trembling with rage. No, we can't. Not anymore. I won't be your doormat any longer. I won't let you and your mother control my life. I storm out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I know what I have to do now. I have to take back control of my life, my future, and I know just where to start. The next morning, I'm back in the lawyer's office, a plan forming in my mind. I've spent the night tossing and turning, my anger and hurt fueling my determination to make Theo and Lillian pay for what they've done. I want to file for divorce, I tell the lawyer, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach. And I want to make sure Theo can't touch a penny of my inheritance. The lawyer nods, his expression serious. Based on what you've told me, we have grounds for a strong case. Theo's financial infidelity is a clear violation of your prenuptial agreement. I feel a flicker of hope at his words. When Theo and I got married, I insisted on a prenup to protect my inheritance. At the time, he had laughed it off, telling me we would never need it. Now, I'm grateful for my foresight. What about Lillian? I ask, my jaw clenching at the thought of my mother-in-law. Can we prove she was involved in the fraud? The lawyer hesitates for a moment before answering. It may be more difficult to implicate her directly, but we can certainly make a case for her being a beneficiary of Theo's actions. If we can show that she knew about the misappropriation of funds and did nothing to stop it, we may be able to hold her accountable as well. I nod, my mind racing with possibilities. I want to make sure she doesn't get a dime of my money. She's been living off of me for too long. We'll do everything we can to ensure that doesn't happen, the lawyer assures me. In the meantime, I recommend you start gathering any evidence you can find of Theo's financial misdeeds. Bank statements, receipts, anything that shows a pattern of misconduct. I leave the office with a newfound sense of purpose, my steps lighter than they've been in months. When I get home, I find Theo in the kitchen, his face drawn and haggard. Where have you been? He asks, his voice tight with accusation. I've been calling you all morning. I shrug, my expression cool and composed. I had some errands to run, not that it's any of your business. Theo's eyes narrow, his mouth twisting into a sneer. Everything you do is my business, Marin. You're my wife. I laugh, the sound harsh and bitter. Your wife? Is that what you call someone you lie to and steal from? Theo takes a step towards me, his fists clenched at his sides. I did what I had to do to take care of my family. My mother needed help, and I provided it. With my money, I spit back. Without my knowledge or consent. That's not taking care of your family, Theo. That's betrayal. Theo's face reddens, his voice rising to a shout. You're one to talk about betrayal. Running off to see a lawyer behind my back, plotting against me. Plotting against you? I echo, my own voice rising to match his. You're the one who's been plotting, Theo. Plotting to use me, to drain me dry. Well, guess what? The jig is up. I know everything, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Theo takes a step back, his expression wary. What are you saying, Marin? I take a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I'm saying I want a divorce, Theo. I want you and your mother out of my life for good. Theo stares at me, his mouth hanging open in shock. You can't be serious. I meet his gaze, my eyes hard and unyielding. Oh, I'm serious, Theo. Dead serious, and I'm just getting started. The next few weeks are a blur of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Theo tries to contest the divorce, but the evidence against him is overwhelming. The bank statements, the receipts, the email trails, all of it paints a clear picture of his deceit and betrayal. Lillian, of course, takes Theo's side, painting me as a vindictive shrew out to destroy her precious son. She even has the audacity to show up at my office, demanding to speak with me. How dare you do this to my boy? She hisses, her eyes narrowed in fury. After everything he's done for you, this is how you repay him? I stare at her in disbelief, my anger rising to a boil. Everything he's done for me? You mean like stealing my money and lying to my face? Like using me as his own personal ATM? Lillian scoffs, waving a dismissive hand. Oh, please. Theo was just taking care of his family like a good son should. If you were any kind of wife, you would understand that. I take a deep breath, trying to calm the rage swirling inside me. Lillian, I am a good wife, but I'm not a doormat. I won't stand by and let you and Theo walk all over me anymore. Lillian's face twists into an ugly sneer. You think you're so high and mighty, don't you? With your fancy job and your big inheritance. Well, let me tell you something, Missy. You're nothing without Theo. Nothing. I feel a cold smile spread across my face. That's where you're wrong, Lillian. I'm everything without Theo, and I'm going to make sure the whole world knows it. Lillian's eyes widen in surprise, but before she can respond, I turn on my heel and walk away, my head held high. That evening, I sit down with the lawyer and make a plan. I've spent years keeping quiet about Theo's misdeeds, protecting his reputation for the sake of our marriage, but now I have no reason to hold back. I want to expose him, I tell the lawyer, my voice trembling with emotion. I want everyone to know what kind of man he really is. The lawyer nods, his expression grim. We can leak the evidence to the press, to his colleagues, to anyone who will listen. But Marin, I have to warn you, this could get ugly. Theo and Lillian won't go down without a fight. I take a deep breath, my resolve hardening. I know, but I'm ready for a fight. I'm done being a victim. The next day, the story breaks in the news. Investment broker accused of fraud. The headlines scream. Wife exposes years of financial abuse. The response is immediate and explosive. Theo's colleagues desert him in droves, his clients pulling their accounts and demanding answers. Even his own firm throws him under the bus, issuing a statement condemning his actions and distancing themselves from the scandal. Lillian, of course, is beside herself with rage. She shows up at my door, her face twisted in fury. "You vindictive bitch," she screams, her voice shrill and hysterical. "How could you do this to us? To your own family?" I stare at her, my expression cold and unyielding. "You stopped being my family the moment you betrayed me, Lillian, the moment you put your own selfish desires above my well-being." Lillian's face crumples, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please, Marin, don't do this. We can work it out. We can find a way to fix this." I shake my head, my voice steady and calm. "There is no fixing this, Lillian. You and Theo made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." I close the door in her face, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. I know the road ahead won't be easy, but for the first time in years I feel free. Free from Theo's lies, free from Lillian's manipulations, free to finally live my life on my own terms. The fallout from the scandal is swift and merciless. Theo loses his job, his clients, his reputation. Overnight, he goes from a successful investment broker to a pariah, shunned by everyone who once admired him. Lillian, too, feels the sting of public disgrace. Her social circle turns their backs on her, canceling invitations and whispering behind her back. She becomes a ghost in her own community, a cautionary tale of what happens when you cross the wrong person. I watch it all unfold with a grim sense of satisfaction. After years of being under Theo and Lillian's thumb, it feels good to finally be the one in control. But even as I savor my victory, I know that my work is not yet done. I arrange a meeting with Lillian, determined to have one final confrontation. She arrives at the coffee shop looking haggard and worn, her once perfect hair and makeup now disheveled and unkempt. "What do you want, Marin?" she asks, her voice flat and defeated. "Haven't you done enough already?" I lean back in my chair, my expression calm and composed. "I just wanted to make sure you understand the full extent of what you and Theo have done, the lives you've ruined, the trust you've betrayed." Lillian's eyes flash with anger. "You act like you're so innocent in all of this, like you didn't benefit from Theo's success just as much as we did." I nod, acknowledging the truth in her words. "You're right, Lillian. I did benefit from Theo's success, but I never knew the true cost of that success. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal." Lillian looks away, her jaw clenching tight. "We did what we had to do to survive, to maintain our lifestyle." I lean forward, my voice low, and intense. "But at what cost, Lillian? Your integrity, your self-respect, your relationship with your son?" Lillian's eyes fill with tears, her lower lip trembling. "Theo will never forgive me for this, for letting him down." I feel a flicker of sympathy for her, but I push it aside. "That's not my problem, Lillian. You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." I stand up to leave, but Lillian grabs my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. "Please, Marin, don't do this. Don't destroy us completely." I wrench my arm away, my voice cold and unyielding. "You destroyed yourselves, Lillian. I just shone a light on the truth." I walk away, my head held high. I know that my journey is not yet over, that there will be more obstacles and challenges to come. But for now, I feel a sense of peace and closure, knowing that I have taken back control of my life. The divorce is finalized a few months later, and I walk out of the courthouse a free woman. Theo and Lillian are left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, their once enviable lifestyle, now nothing more than a distant memory. As for me, I focus on rebuilding my own life. I throw myself into my work, determined to succeed on my own terms. I surround myself with friends and family who love and support me, who appreciate me for who I am, not what I can do for them. And slowly but surely, I begin to heal. The pain and anger that once consumed me start to fade, replaced by a newfound sense of strength and resilience. I know that I will never forget what Theo and Lillian did to me, but I also know that I will not let it define me. I am more than just a victim of their lies and betrayal. I am a survivor, a fighter, a woman who knows her own worth and will never again settle for less than she deserves. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all. Life after the divorce is a strange and unfamiliar landscape. For so long, my identity was tied up in being Theo's wife, in playing the role of the dutiful spouse and daughter-in-law. Now I find myself adrift, unsure of who I am or what I want. But even as I struggle to find my footing, I take solace in the fact that Theo and Lillian are struggling even more. Everywhere they go, they are met with whispers and stares, with people who once fawned over them, now turning their backs in disgust. I hear through the grapevine that Theo has been blacklisted from every major investment firm in the city, his once sterling reputation now forever tarnished. Lillian, too, has become a social pariah, shunned by the very people she once looked down upon. Part of me feels a twisted sense of satisfaction at their downfall. After all the pain and betrayal they put me through, it feels like justice to see them finally facing the consequences of their actions. But another part of me knows that revenge is a hollow victory. It may feel good in the moment, but it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the years of lies and deceit, the trust that was so brutally shattered. And so I focus on moving forward. I throw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges that push me out of my comfort zone. I start seeing a therapist, working through the trauma and pain of my failed marriage. Slowly but surely, I begin to rebuild my life. I make new friends, people who value me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I take up new hobbies, exploring parts of myself that I never had the chance to before, and as I do, I start to realize that my marriage to Theo was not the end of my story. It was just one chapter, a painful and difficult one, but one that I survived. And now, I have the chance to write a new chapter, one filled with hope and possibility. One day, I run into Lillian at the grocery store. She looks older than I remember, her face lined with worry and regret. For a moment, we just stare at each other, unsure of what to say. Finally, Lillian breaks the silence. "Marin, I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. What Theo and I did to you was unforgivable." I nod, my expression guarded. "You're right, Lillian. It was unforgivable." Lillian takes a deep breath, her eyes filling with tears. "I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that." I feel a flicker of something in my chest, not quite forgiveness, but perhaps a glimmer of understanding. "Thank you, Lillian. I appreciate you saying that." We stand there for a moment longer, two women whose lives were once so intertwined, now nothing more than strangers. And then, without another word, we go our separate ways. As I walk out of the store, I feel a sense of lightness, as if a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. I know that I will never forget what Theo and Lillian did to me, but I also know that I no longer need to carry the burden of their betrayal. I am not the same woman I was when I married Theo, and I never will be again. But that's okay, because the woman I am now is stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. I am rebuilding not just my life, but my very soul, and with each passing day, I am one step closer to the person I was always meant to be. It's not an easy journey, but it's one that I am finally ready to take. And as I walk out into the bright sunlight, I feel a sense of hope and possibility that I haven't felt in years. The future is wide open, and for the first time in a long time, I am excited to see where it will take me. "Evan, why was the watch I gave you yesterday sitting in the trash? You thanked me for it when you received it. Didn't you like it?" My voice trembled with a mix of confusion and anger. Evan looked up from his lobster, eyebrows raised, completely unfazed. "What are you talking about, Jessica? It's just a watch." Just a watch. I put down my fork, my hand shaking. It was an anniversary gift. You said you loved it. Now I find it in the trash? He sighed, exasperation etched on his face. Maybe it slipped my mind. It's not that big of a deal. I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. Not that big of a deal? You tossed a gift I saved up for months to buy. Why are you dismissing this like it's nothing? Evan's eyes turned cold. Jessica, do you always have to make everything about you? We're here to celebrate my promotion. Can't we just enjoy the evening? I want to enjoy the evening, Evan, but how am I supposed to when you clearly don't respect me or my feelings? I leaned forward, trying to contain my rising frustration. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I respect you, but you're overreacting. It's just one gift. Don't blow this out of proportion. I swallowed the lump in my throat. This isn't about the watch, Evan. It's about your attitude. You've been so distant lately, like I don't matter. He rolled his eyes. Jessica, I've been busy with work. You wouldn't understand the pressures I'm under. My voice dropped to a whisper. You think I don't understand pressure? I manage the house, I take care of Lily, and I work too. But at least I try to make you feel special. Evan scoffed. Look, I'm here now, aren't I? Can we just drop it? I struggled to hold back tears, but I knew I couldn't ruin the night further, especially in a public place. I took a deep breath and nodded. Fine, let's drop it. The rest of the dinner was a strained silence, the joyous occasion overshadowed by the suffocating tension between us. Even the lavish setting of the restaurant couldn't mask the coldness that enveloped our table. As the waiter brought the dessert, Evan's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. It's a work call. Excuse me. He stood up and walked towards the exit. I stared at his untouched creme brulee and sighed. Was this really my life now? Always second to his job, always discarded like the watch. When he returned, he slid back into his seat with a forced smile. Sorry about that. Crisis averted. Maybe next time just leave the phone, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. He didn't respond, just continued eating like nothing had happened. I watched him, trying to decipher the man I married 12 years ago. Where had we gone wrong? As we left the restaurant, Evan's hand brushed mine. For a fleeting moment, I hoped he would show some sign of remorse, but his grip was limp, indifferent. He hailed a cab, and we headed home in silence, the darkness of the Chicago night mirroring the chasm between us. When we arrived, Evan went straight to his office. I wandered into the living room, sinking into the couch. I could hear Lily's soft breathing from her bedroom. Mommy? Her small voice startled me. Lily, sweetie, what are you doing up? I asked, patting the spot next to me. I couldn't sleep. I had a bad dream, she said, climbing onto my lap. I hugged her tightly, drawing comfort from her warmth. It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. But as I held her, the uncertainty gnawed at me. Evan's behavior tonight was just the tip of the iceberg, and I had a sinking feeling there was much more lurking beneath the surface. As I tucked Lily back into bed, I made a silent vow. Whatever it took, I would get to the bottom of this. I would uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The next morning, I stood over the sink, lost in thought as I scrubbed the dishes. Lily was coloring quietly at the kitchen table. The sun shone through the window, casting a warm glow, but the tension from last night's dinner still hung heavy. Evan walked into the kitchen, dressed for work, tying his tie with a quick, precise motion. Good morning, he said curtly. Morning, I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. He poured himself a cup of coffee, ignoring the tension in the air. So what's the plan for today? Just the usual, I said. Lily has ballet class, and I'll be working on a project from home. Evan nodded, barely paying attention. All right, I'll be late tonight. Big meeting. I felt a familiar pang of frustration. You seem to have a lot of those lately. He sighed, clearly irritated. Jessica, why do you have to check up on every little thing? I told you the watch was probably cheap anyway. Is this some kind of test or something? My grip tightened on the sponge. It's not about the watch, Evan. It's about you acting like you don't care. And here we go again, he muttered, rolling his eyes. I'm late. We'll talk about this later. No, we won't, I whispered to myself as he walked out the door. I listened to the sound of his car pulling away, feeling the familiar mix of anger and helplessness. Mommy, are you okay? Lily asked, looking up from her drawing with wide, innocent eyes. I forced a smile. I'm fine, sweetie. Just a little tired. She nodded and went back to her coloring, satisfied with my answer. I stared at his empty coffee cup, then wiped the kitchen counter with more force than necessary. After getting Lily ready and dropping her off at ballet class, I parked near a cafe to gather my thoughts. I needed to do something, anything, to understand what was going on with Evan. Later that evening, as I was folding laundry, I decided I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. I picked up my phone and called Anna, my best friend. "Hey, Jess," Anna answered, her voice warm and comforting. "Anna, I need to talk," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Of course. What's up?" "It's Evan. He's been acting so strange lately, and last night, well, it wasn't good. I found the watch I gave him in the trash, and he doesn't seem to care about anything anymore." Anna was silent for a moment. "That's horrible, Jess. Do you think something else is going on?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I need to find out." "Do you want me to come over?" "No, it's okay. I just needed to talk to someone. Thanks, Anna." "Anytime, Jess. You know that. Call me if you need anything." "Will do. Thanks." I hung up, feeling slightly better. Anna always knew how to make me feel more grounded. But her words echoed in my mind. Something else is going on. Evan came home late, as expected. I watched him from the corner of the living room as he set his briefcase down and loosened his tie. "Long day?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Yeah, really busy," he replied, not meeting my eyes. I took a deep breath, deciding to test a theory. "I checked your briefcase today. There was nothing related to work in it, just old receipts." He looked up sharply, eyes narrowing. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm worried, Evan. You're hiding something from me." He scoffed, brushing past me. "You're being ridiculous. Trust me or don't, Jessica, but stop playing detective." As he walked away, I knew I was onto something. His reaction confirmed it. There was more to this than long work hours and forgotten gifts, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The next evening, once Lily was asleep, I couldn't shake the growing suspicion gnawing at my mind. I decided to take a bold step. I slipped into Evan's office and quietly opened his desk drawers. My heart pounded as I rummaged through stacks of papers and folders. Then, buried under a pile of documents, I found a small envelope. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were several photos, intimate photos of Evan with another woman. Rage and hurt surged through me. This was it. This was the confirmation I dreaded but needed. Evan walked in, catching me off guard. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he snapped, eyes blazing with anger. I held up the photos, my hand shaking. "Do you recognize yourself in these photos, Evan? How could you betray us like this?" His face darkened, and for a moment he looked like a stranger. "You went through my stuff? That's a new low, Jessica." "Don't turn this around on me," I seethed. "You're the one who's been lying and sneaking around." He tried to snatch the photos from my hand, but I pulled away. "These are private. You had no right." "They're proof," I shot back, voice breaking with emotion, "of your betrayal, of everything you've put us through." Evan's expression turned cold and calculating. "Jessica, you always overreact. You think you can come in here, dig through my things, and play the victim? Grow up." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're unbelievable. After everything we've been through, everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" He shrugged, completely unapologetic. "Maybe if you weren't so controlling, we wouldn't be in this mess." "Controlling? I trusted you, Evan. I thought we were happy." "Funny thing about happiness," he said with a sneer. "It's different for everyone, and you clearly weren't enough for me." His words stung like a slap in the face. "Then why stay? Why lie and cheat? Why drag me and Lily into this nightmare?" He exhaled sharply, looking almost bored. "Convenience. It's easier to keep things as they are. But now you're pushing, and maybe it's time we change the arrangement." I couldn't let him get away with this, not without a fight. "You think you can have your cake and eat it too? Well, guess what, Evan? I'm done being your convenient wife." He smiled, but it was a cruel, hollow gesture. "Good luck, but don't expect me to play nice when you're tearing apart our lives over some petty jealousy." "This isn't jealousy. It's betrayal. And now, everyone will know the real you." I stormed out of his office, clutching the photos. My determination solidified. This wasn't over. I would expose him for the lying, cheating coward he was. In the living room, I collapsed onto the couch, phone in hand. I dialed the number of a private investigator I had found online a few days ago. "Hello, Mr. Thompson? My name is Jessica Harper. I need your help." He listened as I explained my situation, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Mrs. Harper. I'll start immediately," he assured me. I hung up, feeling a surge of mixed emotions, relief, anger, and a fire that burned brighter than ever. Evan's betrayal had lit a fuse, and I was ready to watch him face the consequences. From the darkness of our once happy home, I was determined to bring the truth to light. This was just the beginning. Evan had no idea what was coming. He'd regret underestimating me. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity, but just setting plans into motion with a resolve I didn't know I had. First, I reached out to Rick Taylor, a sharp attorney recommended by Anna. Rick listened intently as I laid out my situation. "I've informed our lawyers and both of our families. There's no turning back now, Evan," I rehearsed under my breath as I gathered documents for Rick. In his office, Rick reviewed the photos and details I provided. "This is solid. We'll hit him hard with this. Brace yourself, Jessica. This won't be easy, but you've got a strong case." I nodded, relief and apprehension swirling within me. "Thanks, Rick. I'm ready for what's to come." That evening, I packed a few essentials for Lily and myself. Evan was out again, probably with his mistress. I called Anna, who offered us a place to stay for a while. Anna greeted us at her door with open arms. "You're welcome here as long as you need, Jess." With a comforting hug, she ushered us in. "Thanks, Anna. I can't tell you how much this means to me." "No need for thanks. Just make yourself at home," Anna said, showing us to our room. I laid Lily down, her small frame practically swallowed by the big guest bed. She looked so peaceful, unaware of the storm that was wreaking havoc on our lives. The next morning, I met with Rick again to finalize the necessary steps. "I'll prepare the paperwork for the divorce. You've also mentioned you think he's been using your joint account for his affair?" "Yes, I'm almost certain of it. Can we investigate that too?" I asked, determination simmering beneath my calm exterior. Rick nodded. "Absolutely. We'll subpoena his financial records. This could work heavily in your favor." With everything set in motion, I took a moment to breathe. Every step was a small move towards reclaiming my life, but there was a heavy weight in my chest, knowing the toll this would take on all involved. Later that afternoon, I made my way back to our house to collect more of our belongings. Evan was there, hovering by the door, eyes darkened with suspicion. "Running away, Jessica? Thought you'd face your mess like an adult," he sneered. "I'm not running. I'm acting. We're done, Evan. I've already spoken to a lawyer," I said, my voice steady and unyielding. His eyes narrowed. "What good do you think a lawyer will do? You're blowing this up for no reason. Think you can really take me on?" I stood firm, refusing to be intimidated. "I've informed our families and the lawyers. There's no turning back now. You will face the consequences for what you did." He scoffed, but I saw a flicker of worry. "You think you're so righteous. Let's see how long you last without my support." "I'll manage. Unlike you, I can hold my head high," I retorted, grabbing our bags and walking past him. As I left the house, I felt a shift. The house that once symbolized our family was just a building now, one that imprisoned memories of deception and misplaced trust. Back at Anna's place, I hugged her tightly. "Thanks for letting us stay here. It means a lot," I said, the heaviness in my voice echoing my exhaustion and determination. "You're strong, Jess. This will pass. You have a whole future ahead of you," she reassured me, her warmth giving me strength. Every day with Anna's support and Rick's guidance brought a sliver of hope. I wasn't alone. Lily and I would move forward, bringing the truth to light and making Evan face the consequences of his betrayal. This was only the beginning of our new journey, one where we'd eventually find peace and, hopefully, justice. A week later, I stood outside our house with Anna and Rick, waiting for Evan to come home. Neighbors lingered nearby, sensing the drama about to unfold. The evening air was thick with anticipation. Evan's car pulled up, and he stepped out, his face hardening as he saw the small gathering. "What's this about, Jessica?" he demanded, walking toward us. I took a deep breath, my pulse racing. "This is about the truth. How could you even think of keeping Lily and me in the dark while you played house with someone else? And now, you'll pay the price." Evan's eyes flicked to Rick, then back to me. "Are you really doing this? Making a spectacle in front of our neighbors? Pathetic." I held my ground, unswayed by his derision. What's pathetic is your arrogance and deceit, Evan. Everyone deserves to know who you really are. Anna stepped forward, her presence a silent support. You've hurt Jess deeply, Evan. She deserves better, and she's finally standing up for herself. He sneered at her. Mind your own business, Anna. This is between me and Jessica. I couldn't hold back any longer. It's everyone's business now. Do you see them, Evan? I pointed to the neighbors gathering around. They see you for what you are, a liar and a cheat. Rick handed me a stack of papers. These are the documents detailing your embezzlement from our accounts, Evan. We have proof you funded your affair with money meant for our family. I watched the color drain from his face. This is outrageous. You have no right. Rick interjected smoothly. Actually, Jessica does have the right. We'll be conducting a full audit of your finances. This won't end well for you. The neighbors murmured, their whispers fueling the air with curiosity and judgment. Evan's facade began to crumble, the weight of his actions pulling him down. You think you can ruin me with this circus? His voice trembled, anger giving way to fear. You've ruined yourself, Evan. This is just the beginning of the consequences. Everything you've tried to hide will come to light, I said firmly. As if on cue, a woman appeared from the shadows. Samantha, Evan's mistress. Her face paled when she saw the crowd. Evan, what's going on? He turned to her, panic flashing in his eyes. Samantha, go back to the car. But it was too late. The damage was already done. Your lies have caught up with you, Evan, I said, my voice steady. Our neighbors, our families, they all know now. You can't hide anymore. Rick stepped forward with finality. Public humiliation is just the start, Evan. There's a legal storm heading your way. Divorce, financial audits, and professional disrepute. Prepare yourself. Evan looked like a cornered animal, his confidence shattered. You're doing this to hurt me, Jessica? Is that what this is all about? This is about justice. You won't walk away from this unscathed. It's time you face the repercussions of your actions, I declared. The crowd watched in silence, the air thick with the weight of Evan's downfall. His once pristine reputation lay in tatters, exposed for all to see. As I turned to leave, Anna and Rick by my side, I felt a sense of closure. The path ahead would be tough, but this confrontation was a pivotal step toward reclaiming my life. Evan's judgment was just beginning, and I wasn't alone in this fight. For the first time, I felt true, unwavering resolve. As we walked away, I glanced back one last time, seeing Evan standing there, surrounded by the wreckage of his deceit. It was a sight that cemented my determination. The truth was out now, and there was no turning back. The following week, I found myself in Rick's downtown office once again. The faint hum of the city outside contrasted sharply with the charged atmosphere inside. Rick laid out the documents in front of us. We're ready to file. The evidence is compelling, he said, his tone matter of fact. Evan walked in, eyes dark with anger. Jessica, this ends here. You're making a mistake. I met his gaze head on. No, Evan, the mistake was yours. Now it's time for the consequences. The defiance in my voice surprised even me. Rick addressed Evan directly. I've reported your misconduct to the board. Say goodbye to that promotion and hello to a lawsuit. Evan's face twisted with rage. You think you've won? This is just a phase. You won't get away with ruining my life. I'm not ruining anything, Evan. You did this to yourself. I'm just ensuring justice, I replied, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. You're vindictive. You can't take that, I moved on. This will only backfire on you. Rick cut in smoothly. I think you need to understand the gravity of your situation. Embezzlement, infidelity, and breach of trust are serious charges. Evan shot Rick a scathing look. You're just her mouthpiece. She'll drop this nonsense soon enough. I stood up, facing him squarely. No, I won't. This isn't nonsense. Every lie, every betrayal, it all comes to light now. You can't bully me into submission anymore. Evan's laugh was bitter and hollow. You're naive, Jessica. Do you think the corporate world cares about your moral high ground? They don't. Rick smiled calmly, showing a confidence that rattled Evan. Her moral high ground, as you call it, is also backed by legal evidence. The board cannot ignore that. Evan scoffed, but I could see the cracks in his facade. You're throwing away everything for what? Spite? No, Evan, for truth, I corrected. Lily and I deserve better. We deserve honesty. Evan turned to leave, shaking his head. "You're making a big mistake, Jessica. One you'll regret." Rick's voice followed him out. "We'll see you in court." As the door shut, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Rick placed a reassuring hand on mine. "You're doing the right thing." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal motions and preparations. The day of the hearing, the tension in the air was palpable. Evan arrived with his lawyer, a shrewd-looking man with a practiced air of confidence. The courtroom buzzed softly as the judge entered. "All rise," the bailiff announced. We presented our case solidly, the evidence piling up against Evan, emails, bank statements, and more intimate photos than I cared to see, each piece a nail in the coffin of his defense. Evan's lawyer tried to deflect, paint me as vindictive and unstable. But my composure, combined with Rick's sharp legal acumen, kept our case watertight. During a recess, Evan approached me. "This is your last chance to call this off, Jessica. I've reported your misconduct to the board. Say goodbye to that promotion and hello to a lawsuit," I repeated, the words now seared into my mind. "I'm not backing down." His face contorted with rage. "This isn't over." I met his gaze with unwavering resolve. "Yes, Evan, it is. For good." As the judge returned with the final decision, I held my breath. The ruling was firm. Evan was found guilty of embezzlement and ordered to repay the funds. Custody of Lily was granted to me, along with substantial spousal support. Leaving the courthouse, a sense of justice and closure washed over me. Evan's storm was finally behind us. As Rick walked beside me, he said, "This is just the beginning of your new life." I looked ahead, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, a new chapter unfolding. Thank you, Rick, for everything. Evan's fall from grace was complete, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Lily at my side, we had a chance for a fresh start, a life untainted by betrayal and deceit. The day after the court ruling, I walked up the courthouse steps, surrounded by reporters and spectators. The media buzzed around Evan's downfall. Cameras flashed, capturing the final spectacle of his shattered life. Evan stormed past me, his face a mask of fury. "You think this is over, Jessica?" he barked, eyes blazing. "You'll regret every bit of this." Ignoring him, I pushed through the crowd, Rick close by my side. He approached a group of reporters waiting eagerly for a statement. "My client has delivered a powerful message about justice and integrity today," Rick said firmly. "No one is above the law." Someone in the crowd shouted at Evan, "How does it feel to lose everything?" Evan spun around, his voice dripping with venom. "This isn't over. She'll pay for this." But his threats couldn't touch me anymore. I felt untouchable, standing in the light of truth. The front-page headlines the next day read, "Corporate exec falls from grace, embezzlement and infidelity exposed." Evan's boss, David Brooks, was among those reading the news. Later, David called me into his office. As I stood there, he leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Mrs. Harper, this must have been quite an ordeal for you." "Yes, it has," I said, maintaining a composed stance. "But it was necessary," David sighed. "Evan's actions have tarnished our company's reputation. We've terminated his employment effective immediately." "I understand," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and lingering sorrow for what could have been. "That being said," David continued, "we appreciate your courage. If you ever need any support, don't hesitate to reach out." "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," I said, genuinely touched. As I left the office, I was overwhelmed with a sense of vindication. Evan's downfall had been swift and deserved. His loss of employment was just the beginning. By the midday news update, the full extent of his fraud was public knowledge, plunging him into scandal. Rick called later that afternoon. "The investigation has uncovered even more damning evidence. Evan's looking at significant jail time." "Good, it's what he deserves," I replied, feeling no sympathy. That evening, I watched Lily play in the park. Claire, Evan's mother, approached cautiously. "Jessica, may I sit?" "Of course," I replied, giving her room. Claire looked weary. "I'm so sorry for everything my son put you through. I never imagined he would fall so low." "Thank you, Claire. I'm just focused on the future now, for Lily and me." My gratitude was genuine, but my firm resolve had no room for bitterness. "I want you to know," Claire added, "you have my full support. Evan, he made his choices, but Lily deserves a stable, loving environment." "I appreciate that, Claire. Truly," I said, squeezing her hand. Her support was a balm to the deep wounds Evan had left. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues over the park, I felt an undeniable sense of closure. Evan's kingdom had crumbled, leaving me to rebuild from the remnants. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Mommy, is Daddy coming back?" I pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "No, sweetie. Daddy made some bad choices, but we're gonna be okay. I promise." Lily nodded sleepily. "Okay, Mommy, as long as we're together." Tears pricked at my eyes, but I held them back. Yes, my love, always together. Sitting by her bedside, watching her drift into dreamland, I realized the enormity of what lay ahead. The road wouldn't be easy, but it was ours to tread. Somewhere in the distance, Evan was grappling with the full weight of his actions, his world falling apart piece by piece. He'd face justice alone, stripped of the power he once wielded with such arrogance. For Lily and me, every day would be a step toward healing, toward building a new life anchored in trust and love. And as the dawn of a new chapter broke, I knew we'd rise stronger, unmasked and unbroken. A few months later, a crisp fall breeze stirred the leaves in the park as Lily and I sat on a bench watching her play. Claire joined us, her eyes reflecting both sadness and strength as she settled in beside me. "Jessica," Claire began, breaking the comfortable silence, "I hear you finalized the divorce." I nodded, watching Lily's laughter fill the air with innocence. "Yes, it's all done now. I have full custody of Lily, and we're focusing on moving forward." Claire sighed, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I'm relieved to hear that. You both deserve peace and happiness after everything Evan put you through." I responded with a soft smile. "Thank you, Claire. Your support has meant the world to us." She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Evan's disgrace has been hard to bear, but he made his choices. It's a hard pill to swallow, but he's paying the price for his actions." "Has he reached out to you?" I asked, curious but cautious. "A few times," she admitted, "but I told him I couldn't condone what he did. I won't enable his behavior. And I've made it clear that my allegiance is with you and Lily." Tears welled in my eyes, gratitude swelling in my chest. "Thank you for standing by us, Claire. It's been a harrowing journey, but knowing you're with us has made it a bit easier." Claire's face softened. "You've shown remarkable strength, Jessica, more than anyone should have to, but you're starting anew, and that's what's important." Our conversation was interrupted by Lily running up to us with a bright smile. "Mommy, can we go to the ice cream shop now?" I chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Sure, sweetie. Claire, would you join us?" Claire's eyes sparkled with affection and she smiled. "I'd love to." As we walked to the nearby ice cream shop, the past few months' struggles felt like they were finally behind us. We ordered our treats, and Lily's delighted giggles filled the air, a testament to the happiness she deserved. While we were seated, savoring our ice cream, Anna showed up unexpectedly. Spotting her, I called her over, grateful for yet another source of support. "Hey, Jessica." "Claire," Anna greeted, pulling up a chair. "How's everything?" "Getting better," I replied, genuinely feeling the weight of truth. "Each day is a little brighter." Claire nodded in agreement. "We're taking it one step at a time, but there's hope." Anna smiled warmly. "That's the spirit. You're stronger than you realize." Our conversation shifted to lighter topics, the bond of friendship and family providing a sense of normalcy. It was a reminder that life could be good again, untainted by Evan's betrayal. Later that night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy, are we happy now?" I kissed her forehead, feeling a warmth spread through my soul. "Yes, my love, we are happy and will keep finding new ways to be even happier." Lily nodded, satisfied with my answer, and drifted into a peaceful sleep. Standing by her bedside, I reflected on the journey. Evan's downfall had been necessary for our freedom, and though it was painful, it illuminated the path to a better future. The next morning, over breakfast, Rick called with an update. "Jessica, just wanted to let you know, Evan's fraud charges will lead to a trial soon. His former company has decided to pursue legal action." "Thanks, Rick," I said, feeling a sense of finality. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Claire looked up from her coffee and asked, "What's next for you, Jessica?" "I'm focused on Lily and our future now," I answered with a serene smile. "We've shed the past, and it's a clean start." As I said it, I felt the truth of those words settle in my heart. In the end, justice had been served, and the foundation for our new life was strong. We would face the future unmasked, resilient, and ready for whatever came our way, I stared at the bank statement in disbelief, my hands shaking. This couldn't be right. I blinked, hoping the numbers would magically change, but they remained stubbornly the same. A $50,000 loan from Richard's parents? When did this happen? "Richard," I called out, my voice echoing through our suburban home. "Can you come here for a second?" I heard his footsteps approaching, and he appeared in the doorway of our home office, an easy smile on his face. "What's up, Lucia?" I held up the statement. "Care to explain this?" His smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Oh, that? It's nothing to worry about, honey. Just a little financial help from Mom and Dad." "A little help?" I felt my blood pressure rising. "Richard, $50,000 is not a little help. When were you planning on telling me about this?" He shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "I didn't think it was a big deal. You know how my parents are, always wanting to help out." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. "That's not the point. We're married. We're supposed to make these decisions together." "Look, Lucia," he said, his tone turning patronizing, "I didn't want to bother you with the details. You've been so busy with work lately, I thought I'd handle it." I stood up, facing him directly. "Handle it? By going behind my back? We agreed to be open about our finances when we got married, remember?" Richard's face hardened. "I made an executive decision. Sometimes that's necessary in a marriage." "Necessary?" I scoffed. "What was so necessary that you needed $50,000 without discussing it with me?" He waved his hand dismissively. "It's complicated business stuff. You wouldn't understand." That stung. "Try me," I challenged. Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, can we talk about this later? I have a meeting in 10 minutes. I felt the anger bubbling up inside me. "No, we can't talk about this later. This is important, Richard. We need to discuss this now." He checked his watch, impatience clear on his face. "I don't have time for this right now, Lucia. We'll talk tonight, okay?" Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, stunned and furious. I sank back into my chair, my mind racing. This wasn't like Richard. We'd always been open with each other, especially about money. What was he hiding? My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a text from my best friend Meredith. "Lunch today? I need girl talk." I smiled despite my anger. Meredith always had perfect timing. "Absolutely," I texted back. "You won't believe what I just found out." As I gathered my things to leave, I noticed a piece of mail on Richard's desk. It was addressed to him, but the return address caught my eye. Stella Jewelers. My stomach twisted. Our anniversary wasn't for months, and my birthday had just passed. I picked up the envelope, weighing it in my hand. It felt like it contained a small box. Should I open it? No, I decided, putting it back down. I wasn't going to stoop to his level of secrecy. But as I walked out the door, the image of that envelope burned in my mind. First the loan, now this mysterious package. What else was Richard hiding? I climbed into my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. As I pulled out of the driveway, I made a silent vow to myself. I was going to get to the bottom of this, no matter what it took. Richard might think he could keep secrets from me, but he was about to learn just how determined I could be. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would turn my entire world upside down. I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me since discovering Richard's secret loan. As I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work, my mind kept drifting back to our argument. Something wasn't adding up. The ping of an incoming email jolted me from my thoughts. It was from Richard. "Hey, honey, can you transfer $300 to my account for this month's expenses? Thanks." I blinked at the screen, confused. Only $300? That was barely enough to cover groceries, let alone our other bills. Richard's six-figure salary had always covered most of our expenses. What was going on? I picked up my phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. Typical. "Richard, it's me. We need to talk about this $300. Call me back, please." Hours ticked by with no response. By dinner time, I was fuming. The front door opened, and Richard strolled in, whistling. "Hey, Lucia," he said, dropping his briefcase. "What's for dinner?" I crossed my arms. "We need to talk." His smile faltered. "About what?" "About the $300 you asked for." "Richard, that's not nearly enough for our monthly expenses." "What's going on?" He shrugged, heading for the fridge. "I thought we could tighten our belts a bit, save some money." "Save money," I echoed. Since when have you been concerned about saving, and why now, right after taking out a huge loan from your parents? Richard's back stiffened. He turned to face me, his expression guarded. Look, Lucia, I told you not to worry about that loan. I've got everything under control. Do you? I challenged. Because from where I'm standing, nothing about this seems under control. First the loan, now this. What aren't you telling me? He slammed the fridge door shut. For God's sake, Lucia, can't you just trust me? I'm handling our finances. That's my job. Your job? I felt my temper rising. I thought we were partners in this marriage. When did it become your job to make unilateral decisions about our money? Richard ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It's just money. Just money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Richard, money is what keeps a roof over our heads and food on our table. It's not just anything. He waved a dismissive hand. You're being hysterical. I've got everything under control. Now can we please just have dinner and forget about this? I stood there, stunned by his cavalier attitude. This wasn't the Richard I knew. The man I married would never dismiss my concerns like this. Fine, I said, my voice cold. Dinner's in the oven. I've lost my appetite. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Richard to serve himself. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I heard him muttering under his breath. Once in our room, I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Something was seriously wrong. Richard's behavior, the secret loan, the measly $300 for expenses. None of it made sense. I pulled out my phone and texted Meredith. Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? I need your advice. Her response was immediate. Of course, everything okay? I stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Was everything okay? I didn't think so, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what was wrong. I don't know, I finally replied. I'll explain tomorrow. As I set my phone down, I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs. I quickly wiped away the tears I hadn't realized were falling and steeled myself for another confrontation. But when he entered the room, he didn't say a word. He just grabbed his pajamas and headed for the bathroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of dread. Whatever was going on with Richard, I was determined to find out. And I had a feeling I wasn't going to like what I discovered. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning as my mind raced with questions about Richard's behavior. By morning, I was exhausted but determined to get answers. While Richard was in the shower, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked his phone. My hands shook as I scrolled through his messages and emails. What I found made my blood run cold. Credit card bills, expensive restaurant receipts, hotel charges, all hidden from our joint account. I heard the shower turn off and quickly put the phone back. When Richard emerged, I was sitting on the bed, my face pale. Lucia, you okay? He asked, toweling his hair. I looked up at him, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Richard, we need to talk about our finances, now. He sighed, dropping the towel. Not this again. I told you, I've got it under control. Really? I stood up, my anger rising. Then explain the credit card bills I found. The restaurants, the hotels. Where's all that money coming from, Richard? His face darkened. You went through my phone? What happened to trust? Trust? I laughed bitterly. You lost that right when you started hiding things from me. Now answer the question. Richard's jaw clenched. It's work-related, client meetings, business trips. You wouldn't understand. Try me, I challenged. He turned away, buttoning his shirt. I don't have time for this. I'm late for work. As he headed for the door, I called after him. If you walk out now, don't bother coming back tonight. He paused, hand on the doorknob, but didn't turn around. Then, without a word, he left. I sank onto the bed, my head in my hands. How had we come to this? My phone buzzed, a reminder of my coffee date with Meredith. I grabbed my purse and headed out, desperate for a friendly face. Meredith was already at our usual spot, 2 steaming cups waiting. One look at my face and she knew something was wrong. Spill, she said, pushing a coffee towards me. I told her everything, the loan, the $300, the hidden expenses. Her eyes widened with each revelation. Lucia, she said gently when I finished, have you considered that Richard might be seeing someone else? The words hit me like a punch to the gut. No, I whispered. He wouldn't. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. The hotels, the expensive dinners, it all suddenly made a horrible kind of sense. What am I going to do? I asked, fighting back tears. Meredith squeezed my hand. First, we're going to get proof. Then we're going to make him pay. We spent the next few hours plotting. By the time I got home, I had a plan. I logged into our joint account, my heart sinking as I saw the balance. Most of our savings were gone. I checked our credit card statements next, finding charge after charge for things I'd never seen or known about. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a web of financial deceit that left me breathless. Richard had been living a double life, spending money we didn't have on God knows what or who. The front door opened, and Richard walked in. He looked tired, his tie loosened. "Lucia," he started, "about this morning." I cut him off. "I know everything, Richard. The credit cards, the drained savings. How could you do this to us?" He paled, stammering. "I can explain." "Save it," I snapped. "I want the truth, all of it, now." Richard slumped into a chair, looking defeated. I made some bad investments. I thought I could fix it before you found out." "And the hotels, the restaurants?" I pressed. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Business meetings, networking." I knew he was lying, but I couldn't prove it. Not yet. "I want access to all our accounts," I demanded. "No more secrets." Richard nodded, looking relieved that I hadn't pushed further. But as he headed upstairs, I caught a glimpse of his phone screen lighting up with a message. From someone named Stella. My heart raced. Who was Stella? And what else was Richard hiding? I had a feeling I was about to uncover something far worse than financial troubles. And I wasn't sure our marriage could survive it. The name Stella haunted me for days. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was more than just a business contact. Richard's secretive behavior and our dwindling finances painted a picture I didn't want to see, but couldn't ignore. I was lost in these thoughts when the doorbell rang. A delivery man stood outside, holding a small package. "Delivery for Richard Thompson," he said cheerfully. I signed for it, my heart racing. The return address read Stella Jewelers, the same name from the message on Richard's phone. With trembling hands, I brought the package inside. I knew I shouldn't open it, but the weight of secrets and lies was crushing me. I had to know. I carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a velvet box. Inside was a stunning diamond necklace, far more extravagant than anything Richard had ever bought me. A small card fell out. "To my dearest Stella, happy anniversary. All my love, Richard." The room spun. I clutched the necklace, its cold diamonds biting into my palm. This was no business gift. This was proof of something far worse. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the necklace. The sound of Richard's key in the lock jolted me back to reality. I quickly shoved everything back into the box and hid it under a couch cushion. Richard walked in, his usual charming smile in place. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" I stood up, my legs shaky. "Richard, we need to talk." His smile faltered. "What's wrong? Who's Stella?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. The color drained from his face. "What?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I snapped, pulling out the package. "Explain this." Richard's eyes widened as he saw the jewelry box. He reached for it, but I snatched it away. "Lucia, it's not what you think," he stammered. "Really? Because I think you're having an affair. I think you've been lying to me about everything, the money, the loans, all of it." Richard's demeanor changed. His shoulders straightened and a cold look entered his eyes. "You had no right to open that. It's none of your business." His words hit me like a slap. "None of my business? I'm your wife." He laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "My wife? Is that what you think you are? You're just a convenience, Lucia, someone to keep the house clean and look good at company parties." I staggered back, shocked by his cruelty. How long?" "Long enough," he sneered. "Stella understands me in ways you never could. She doesn't nag about money or snoop through my things." Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "So all of this, our marriage, our life together, it's been a lie?" Richard shrugged, reaching for the necklace. "It is what it is. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans tonight." As he turned to leave, something snapped inside me. Years of love, trust, and shared dreams crumbled in an instant. In their place, a fierce anger rose. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He turned back, eyebrow raised. "Excuse me?" I stood tall, meeting his gaze. "You heard me. You're not leaving this house until we sort this out. All of it, the money, the affair, everything." Richard's face darkened. "You can't tell me what to do." "Watch me," I challenged. I've got proof of your financial misdeeds, Richard. One call to the police and your perfect little world comes crashing down. Fear flashed in his eyes, quickly replaced by anger. You wouldn't dare. I pulled out my phone. Try me. We stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. I knew in that moment that everything had changed. The man I loved was gone, replaced by this stranger who'd betrayed me in every possible way. As I dialed the first digit, I realized there was no going back. Whatever happened next would change our lives forever, and I was ready for it. My finger hovered over the phone, Richard's face a mask of fury and fear. Just as I was about to press the final digit, Meredith's voice echoed in my head. Don't do anything rash, we need proof. I lowered the phone, my heart pounding. You have one chance to explain everything, Richard. One chance to save whatever's left of our marriage. He sneered, but I saw the relief in his eyes. There's nothing to explain. You're overreacting as usual. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Fine, if that's how you want to play it, I'll find the truth myself. I stormed out of the house, leaving Richard standing there dumbfounded. I drove straight to Meredith's place, tears blurring my vision. Meredith opened the door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a hug. Oh, honey, what happened? Between sobs, I told her everything. The necklace, Stella, Richard's cruel words. Meredith listened, her face growing darker with each revelation. That bastard, she muttered. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to find this Stella, and we're going to get proof of everything. For the next few hours, we played detective. Meredith, it turned out, had a knack for online sleuthing. We scoured social media, piecing together the puzzle of Richard's secret life. Look at this, Meredith said, pointing to her laptop screen. It was a photo of Richard at a restaurant, his arm around a young blonde woman. The caption read, Anniversary dinner with my love, 2 years strong. The date was from last month. 2 years. He'd been cheating on me for 2 years. There's more, Meredith said gently. She pulled up financial records, showing large transfers from our joint account to an unknown recipient. He's been funneling money to her, I whispered, the reality of his betrayal sinking in. Meredith squeezed my hand. Lucia, I hate to say this, but I think it's time to talk to a lawyer. I nodded, numb. You're right. This marriage is over. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Richard. Where are you? Come home. We need to talk. I showed Meredith the message. Her eyes narrowed. Don't go alone. I'm coming with you. When we arrived at the house, Richard was pacing in the living room. He looked up, surprise flashing across his face when he saw Meredith. What's she doing here? He demanded. She's here to support me, I said, my voice steady, while you tear our life apart. Richard's face softened, a look I'd seen him use countless times to charm his way out of trouble. Lucia, baby, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can work this out. I almost laughed. Work it out? After 2 years of lies? After draining our accounts for your mistress? His eyes widened. How did you? It doesn't matter, I cut him off. What matters is that it's over, Richard. I want a divorce. The charm vanished from his face, replaced by cold anger. You'll regret this, Lucia. You're nothing without me. Meredith stepped forward, fire in her eyes. Watch it, Richard. One more word and I'll show you just how much Lucia doesn't need you. Richard glared at us both, then stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I sank onto the couch, exhaustion washing over me. What do I do now? Meredith sat beside me, her arm around my shoulders. Now we fight. We get you the best lawyer in town, and we make sure Richard pays for every lie, every betrayal. I nodded, a new determination rising within me. Richard thought I was nothing without him? I'd show him just how wrong he was. As I sat there planning my next move, I realized something. The pain of Richard's betrayal was still there, but alongside it was a growing sense of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Okay, I said, sitting up straighter. Let's do this. It's time Richard learned that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Meredith grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. That's my girl. Let's make him rue the day he ever messed with Lucia Thompson. As we began to plan, I knew the road ahead would be tough. But I was ready. Richard had underestimated me for the last time. Now it was my turn to show him and the world exactly what I was made of. The day of reckoning had arrived. Armed with a folder full of evidence and Meredith by my side, I marched into our house, ready for the final confrontation with Richard. He was in his study, lounging in his leather chair, as if he didn't have a care in the world. The sight of him, so nonchalant after everything he'd done, made my blood boil. "Richard," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "We need to talk." He looked up, his eyes narrowing when he saw Meredith. "I thought I told you to come alone." "And I thought we had a faithful marriage," I shot back. "Looks like we were both wrong." I slammed the folder on his desk, spreading out bank statements, hotel receipts, and screenshots of his conversations with Stella. "Care to explain this?" I asked, watching the color drain from his face. Richard's eyes darted between the documents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, his demeanor changed. He leaned back, a smug smile spreading across his face. "So what?" he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "You caught me. Congratulations. What are you going to do about it?" His cavalier attitude stunned me. "What am I going to do? I'm divorcing you, Richard, and I'm taking everything." He laughed, a cold, cruel sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Good luck with that, sweetheart. You signed a prenup, remember? You'll get nothing." My heart sank. The prenup. How could I have forgotten? But then Meredith stepped forward, a fierce glint in her eye. "Actually, Richard," she said, pulling out another document, "that prenup becomes null and void in cases of infidelity, and we have more than enough proof of that." Richard's smug expression faltered. "You're bluffing." "Try us," I challenged. "We've got statements from the private investigator, testimony from hotel staff, even a signed affidavit from Stella herself." At the mention of Stella's name, Richard's composure cracked. "You talked to Stella?" "Oh, yes," Meredith chimed in. "She was quite helpful once we explained how you've been siphoning company funds to finance your little affair. Turns out she's not too keen on being an accessory to embezzlement." Richard lunged for the phone, but I was quicker. I snatched it away, my heart pounding. "It's over, Richard," I said. "You've lost everything. The company knows about the embezzlement. Stella's gone. And now I'm leaving too." For a moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Then, like a cornered animal, he lashed out. "You think you can survive without me?" he snarled. "You're nothing, Lucia. Just a trophy wife who got lucky. Without me, you'll be back to being a nobody in no time." His words stung, but I stood my ground. "I'd rather be a nobody with dignity than spend another second as your wife." I turned to leave, but Richard grabbed my arm, his grip painfully tight. "You're not going anywhere," he growled. Suddenly, Meredith was there, her phone out. "Let her go, Richard, or I start live streaming. I'm sure your company would love to see how you treat women." Richard released me, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat. "Oh, but it is," I said, rubbing my arm. "Goodbye, Richard." As we walked out, I heard the crash of something being thrown against the wall, but I didn't look back. My legs were shaky, and tears threatened to spill, but I held my head high. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like my first real breath in years. "You did it," Meredith said, squeezing my hand. "You're free." I nodded, a mix of relief and fear washing over me. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to choose. As we drove away, I realized this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of my new life, and despite the pain and uncertainty, I was ready to embrace it. The keys to my new apartment felt heavy in my hand as I stood at the threshold. This small, one-bedroom space was a far cry from the luxurious house I'd shared with Richard, but it was mine. All mine. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the weight of my new reality settling on my shoulders. Freedom tasted bittersweet. "Home sweet home," I murmured to myself, setting down the last of my boxes. My phone buzzed. It was an email from my lawyer. The divorce proceedings were moving forward, but Richard was fighting tooth and nail for every penny. I sighed, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. Just then, another email popped up. This one made my heart race. It was from my boss, requesting an urgent meeting. With trembling fingers, I dialed her number. "Lucia," she said, her voice tense. "We need to talk about your position at the company." My throat went dry. "What about it?" "Richard has been making some claims. He's suggesting that you were complicit in his financial misdeeds." The room spun. "That's a lie," I exclaimed. "I had no idea what he was doing." "I believe you," my boss said, "but the board is concerned. We need to conduct an internal investigation. In the meantime," I knew what was coming before she said it. "You're suspending me." "With pay," she added quickly. "But yes." I'm sorry, Lucia. I ended the call, my mind reeling. Richard had struck again, this time aiming for my career. The one thing I had left. I sank onto my new second-hand couch, fighting back tears. How much more could I lose? My phone rang again. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello, I said warily. Is this Lucia Thompson? A woman's voice asked. Yes, who's this? This is Stella. I nearly dropped the phone. Stella, Richard's ex-mistress, she finished. Listen, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I need to talk to you. It's about Richard. My heart pounded. What about him? He's not done with you, Lucia. He's planning something big, something that could ruin you completely. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? Meet me, Stella said urgently. I'll explain everything. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown, my mind racing. What could Richard possibly have planned? Hadn't he taken enough from me already? As I grabbed my purse to leave, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Meredith. Lucia, turn on the news, now. I fumbled for the remote, flicking on the small TV in my new apartment. My jaw dropped as I saw Richard's face filling the screen. Allegations against my soon-to-be ex-wife, Lucia Thompson, he was saying, his voice dripping with false sincerity. It pains me to reveal this, but she was the mastermind behind the embezzlement scheme. I was merely a pawn in her elaborate fraud. I watched in horror as Richard spun a web of lies, painting me as a manipulative criminal who had used him for his money and connections. He even produced doctored documents and emails to support his claims. My phone was ringing off the hook now. My lawyer, my parents, even old college friends. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was watching my life, my reputation, everything I'd worked for, crumble before my eyes. In that moment, standing alone in my small apartment, watching Richard destroy me on national television, I felt more alone and defeated than ever before. But beneath the shock and despair, a spark of determination flickered to life. Richard thought he'd won. He thought he'd broken me for good. But he'd underestimated me once before, and I wasn't about to let him do it again. With shaking hands, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. I had a meeting with Stella to get to, and this time, I was going to fight back with everything I had. The game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. I stood outside the courthouse, my heart pounding. This was it. The final showdown. Months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and relentless determination had led to this moment. As I walked in, I caught sight of Richard. He looked haggard, a far cry from the polished man I'd married. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw a flicker of the man I once loved. But then his gaze hardened, and I remembered why we were here. The courtroom was packed. I saw Meredith in the back, giving me a reassuring nod. And there, to my surprise, was Stella, looking nervous but determined. As the judge entered, a hush fell over the room. Richard's lawyer spoke first, weaving a tale of my supposed deceit and manipulation. I gripped the edge of my seat, willing myself to stay calm. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, a stack of documents in hand. Your Honor, we have evidence that will prove beyond doubt that Mr. Thompson, not Mrs. Thompson, was the sole perpetrator of these financial crimes. What followed was a meticulous unraveling of Richard's lies. Bank statements, witness testimonies, and, most damning of all, a series of emails between Richard and his co-conspirators, detailing every step of his embezzlement scheme. I watched Richard's face as the truth came to light. His cool facade crumbled, replaced by panic and then defeat. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. Stella stood up, her voice shaky but clear. Your Honor, I have something to add. She produced a USB drive. This contains recordings of Mr. Thompson admitting to his crimes and planning to frame Mrs. Thompson. He thought I was asleep when he made these calls. Richard's face went ashen. Stella, how could you? He hissed. She met his gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. As the judge reviewed the new evidence, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The truth was finally out. The verdict came swiftly. Richard was found guilty on all counts. As the judge detailed his sentence, jail time, and hefty fines, I saw Richard's parents in the gallery, their faces a mix of shock and disappointment. Outside the courthouse, Richard's father approached me. Lucia, he said, his voice heavy with regret, we had no idea. We want to make this right. They offered to pay the settlement we'd agreed upon in the divorce to help undo some of the damage their son had caused. It wouldn't erase the pain, but it was a start. As I watched Richard being led away in handcuffs, a complex mix of emotions washed over me. Relief, sadness, and finally, a sense of freedom. Meredith hugged me tightly. "It's over, Lucia. You did it." I nodded, tears in my eyes. We did it. In the weeks that followed, life began to take on a new shape. My name was cleared, and I was reinstated at work with a promotion. The settlement from Richard's parents allowed me to start fresh, on my own terms. One sunny afternoon, as I was setting up my new home office, I found an old photo of Richard and me. We were smiling, blissfully unaware of what lay ahead. For a moment, I mourned for that innocent couple. But then I looked around at my new life, built with my own strength, surrounded by true friends and full of possibilities. I realized that while the journey had been painful, it had led me to a place of authenticity and self-discovery I might never have found otherwise. I picked up the photo and, after a moment's hesitation, placed it in a drawer. It was part of my past, but it no longer defined my future. As I closed the drawer, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my new mentor at work, offering to grab coffee and discuss my ideas for our upcoming project. I smiled, feeling a surge of excitement. This was my life now, full of challenges, yes, but also full of opportunity and genuine connections. Time for a new chapter, I said to myself, grabbing my keys. As I stepped out into the sunshine, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it might lead. Richard had tried to break me, but in the end he'd only made me stronger, and that strength would carry me forward into whatever adventures lay ahead. I jolted awake, my heart pounding in my chest. The recurring nightmare of finding that damning email on Aaron's laptop had become all too familiar lately. As I reached for my phone to check the time, the harsh glow of the screen confirmed it was well past midnight. Aaron still wasn't home. I sighed deeply, the frustration and loneliness I'd grown accustomed to settling in once more. When had our marriage taken such a sharp turn? Aaron used to be the most attentive and loving husband a woman could ask for. But over the past few years, his obsession with work had consumed him, leaving me to fend for myself more often than not. Memories of our early years together flooded my mind. The way he used to look at me, his eyes sparkling with adoration, the spontaneous weekend getaways and romantic gestures that made my heart flutter. Those were the moments that had made me fall head over heels for him. The moments that had convinced me he was my soulmate. But lately, those moments had become few and far between. Aaron's constant business trips and late nights at the office had driven a wedge between us, and the distance only seemed to be growing wider with each passing day. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder if the suspicious email I'd found was just the tip of the iceberg. Was Aaron really working as hard as he claimed, or was there something or someone else occupying his time? The thought made my stomach churn, but I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion any longer. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. With a heavy heart, I rose from bed and made my way to the home office. Aaron's laptop sat closed on his desk, as if taunting me with the secrets it held. I took a deep breath and opened it, my fingers trembling as I navigated to his email inbox. There it was, the message that had set off this whirlwind of doubt and mistrust. A innocuous-looking email from an unknown sender, but with a subject line that made my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you again, my love." I felt the tears welling up in my eyes as I read and reread those words, each time feeling like a knife to my heart. Was this proof of Aaron's infidelity? Or was I simply letting my insecurities get the better of me? One thing was certain, I couldn't let this go unanswered any longer. As soon as Aaron walked through that door, I was going to demand answers, and if he was lying to me, there would be hell to pay. The sound of Aaron's key turning in the lock sent a jolt through my body. I quickly minimized the incriminating email and composed myself, my heart racing in anticipation of the confrontation to come. As he stepped through the door, Aaron's eyes went wide with surprise at seeing me still awake. "Marta, what are you doing up so late?" I fixed him with a stern glare, the anger and hurt I'd been bottling up for months finally bubbling to the surface. "Where have you been, Aaron? And don't give me that working late excuse again." he sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. I told you it's this big project I'm overseeing. It's a make-or-break deal for the company. And yet you have time to send flirtatious emails to other women? I spat, slamming the laptop lid shut with a bang. Aaron's face drained of color. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, I shouted, shoving the printout of the damning email in his face. Who is she, Aaron? Tell me right now, or so help me. He recoiled, holding up his hands in a placating gesture. Whoa, calm down. It's not what you think, I swear. I scoffed, feeling the tears of betrayal stinging my eyes. Really? Then what is it, Aaron? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been carrying on an affair behind my back. Aaron's jaw clenched, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt cross his features. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a mask of indifference. You're overreacting, Marta. It's just a harmless flirtation, nothing more. Harmless? I echoed, my voice dripping with disbelief. How can you stand there and lie to my face like that? He sighed again, pinching the bridge of his nose. Look, I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression, but I promise you there's nothing going on. This project has just been incredibly stressful, and sometimes I let off a little steam by flirting online. It doesn't mean anything. I stared at him, searching his eyes for any hint of sincerity, but all I found was a cold but detached gaze that chilled me to the bone. In that moment, I realized that the man standing before me was a stranger, a far cry from the loving, attentive husband I had once known. You know what, Aaron? I said, my voice low and trembling with barely contained fury. I don't believe a word you're saying, and if you think I'm just going to sit back and let you continue to disrespect me and our marriage like this, you've got another thing coming. Aaron's brow furrowed, and for a brief moment I thought I saw a flicker of concern in his eyes. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same infuriating nonchalance. Marta, please, he said, reaching out to touch my arm. Don't do anything rash. We can work through this, I promise. But as I jerked away from his grasp, I knew in my heart that there was no going back. The trust that had once been the foundation of our relationship was shattered beyond repair, and no amount of empty promises could fix it. Save it, Aaron, I spat, turning on my heel and heading for the bedroom. I'm done listening to your lies. From now on, you're going to have to face the consequences of your actions. As I slammed the door behind me, cutting off any further protest from Aaron, a single thought ran through my mind. If he thought this was over, he had no idea what was coming. The shrill ring of my phone jolted me from my restless slumber. I squinted at the caller ID. It was my older sister, Beth. Hello? I croaked, my voice still thick with sleep. Marta, it's me. I'm sorry for calling so early, but I just had a feeling something was wrong, Beth said, her tone laced with concern. I sighed deeply, the weight of the previous night's confrontation with Aaron settling back onto my shoulders. You could say that. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. It's Aaron, isn't it? What did that bastard do this time? Despite the gravity of the situation, I couldn't help but crack a small smile at Beth's protective nature. She had never been Aaron's biggest fan, always claiming there was something off about him that she couldn't quite put her finger on. I found an email on his laptop, I began, the words catching in my throat. It was from some woman calling him my love and saying she couldn't wait to see him again. Beth let out a low whistle. Wow, he's not even trying to hide it anymore, is he? That slimy son of a bitch. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see it. I confronted him about it last night, but he just brushed it off as harmless flirtation. Like that's supposed to make it okay? Of course he did, Beth scoffed. Men like Aaron think they can get away with anything. They lie and cheat and manipulate, and then expect us to just roll over and take it. Her words struck a chord deep within me, fanning the flames of anger and resentment that had been simmering since my discovery. She was right. I had spent far too long letting Aaron walk all over me, making excuses for his behavior while he carried on without a care in the world. Well, not this time, I said, my voice taking on a steely edge. I'm not going to just sit back and let him continue to disrespect me like this. There was a pause, and then Beth spoke again, her tone slightly softer. What are you going to do, sis? I took a deep breath, the beginnings of a plan formulating in my mind. For starters, I'm going to gather more evidence. If he thinks he can just sweep this under the rug with a few empty promises, he's got another thing coming. That's my girl, Beth said approvingly. You document every little thing, every shady email, every suspicious phone call. Build an airtight case against that lying snake. I nodded, feeling a newfound sense of determination coursing through my veins. And that's just the beginning. By the time I'm through with him, Aaron is going to wish he never laid eyes on that other woman. Beth let out a low chuckle. Atta girl. Give him hell, Marta. He deserves every bit of it and more. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For too long, I had been the victim, the dutiful wife pushed aside and disrespected by her unfaithful husband. But no more. From that moment on, the tables were turned, and Aaron was the one who would be made to pay for his transgressions. With a newfound sense of purpose, I got to work, meticulously documenting every shred of evidence I could find. Phone records, credit card statements, anything that could shed light on the depths of Aaron's betrayal. And as the incriminating trail grew longer, so too did my thirst for vengeance. Because at the end of the day, there was one thing I knew for certain. Aaron Thompson was going to get exactly what was coming to him, and I was going to be the one to deliver it. Over the next few weeks, I became a woman possessed, consumed by the singular goal of exposing Aaron's infidelity once and for all. Every spare moment was dedicated to tracking his movements, scouring through phone records and credit card statements for any shred of evidence that could shed light on his betrayal. And slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. Late-night calls to an unknown number, charges for fancy dinners and hotel rooms that certainly weren't for business purposes. It was all there, right in front of me, a damning paper trail that left no doubt in my mind that Aaron had been carrying on an affair behind my back. But it wasn't until I stumbled across a series of flirtatious text messages that the full picture finally came into focus. The woman's name was Clara Evans, a 30-year-old project coordinator at Aaron's firm. And from the looks of things, she and Aaron had been involved in a torrid affair for quite some time. The messages made my stomach churn. The pet names, the suggestive language, the blatant disregard for the sanctity of our marriage. It was all there in black and white, a brutal reminder of just how little Aaron seemed to care about me or our vows. As I sat there, staring at the damning evidence before me, a wave of anger and humiliation washed over me. How could he do this to me? To us? After everything we'd been through together, how could he so callously throw it all away for some cheap fling with a woman half his age? In that moment, something inside me shifted. The hurt and betrayal I'd been feeling gave way to a burning desire for revenge, a primal need to make Aaron pay for his transgressions in the most public and humiliating way possible. And that's when the idea struck me. I knew from the messages that Aaron and Clara had plans to meet up for a romantic dinner that weekend at a fancy restaurant downtown. The perfect setting for a little surprise reunion, I thought to myself with a wicked grin. The next few days were a blur as I meticulously planned every last detail. I booked a reservation at the restaurant under a fake name, ensuring I'd be seated close enough to Aaron and Clara's table to cause maximum disruption. I even went so far as to have a new dress tailored. A slinky little number that was sure to turn heads and make Aaron realize exactly what he was throwing away. Finally, the night of reckoning arrived. As I stepped into the restaurant, my heart was pounding with a heady mix of nerves and anticipation. But the moment I spotted Aaron and Clara sitting in a cozy corner booth, all traces of doubt melted away, replaced by a steely resolve. "Well, well, well," I announced loudly, striding toward their table with purpose. "Isn't this just a cozy little date night?" Aaron's head whipped around, his eyes going wide with shock and fear as he registered my presence. "Marta, what are you doing here?" I fixed him with a withering glare, reveling in the way he seemed to shrink under my gaze. "Oh, I think you know exactly why I'm here, Aaron. This little charade of yours has gone on long enough." Clara, for her part, looked equally stunned, her perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression of abject horror. "Aaron, what's going on? Who is this woman?" I let out a derisive snort. "I'm his wife, you little homewrecker, the one he's been lying to and cheating on for God knows how long." The restaurant had gone deathly silent, all eyes trained on our dramatic confrontation. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew I should feel embarrassed, ashamed at causing such a public spectacle. But in that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. Aaron was the one who should be ashamed of the lies, the betrayal, the utter disrespect he'd shown me in our marriage. And I was going to make sure the whole world knew it. "This little date ends tonight," I spat, leaning in close so only he and Clara could hear me. "You want to know what real karma looks like, Aaron? You're about to find out." The aftermath of my dramatic confrontation at the restaurant played out like a surreal blur. Aaron and Clara had scrambled to gather their things and beat a hasty retreat, their faces twisted in matching expressions of shock and humiliation. As for me, I simply stood there, reveling in the stunned silence that had fallen over the dining room, savoring the sweet taste of revenge. It wasn't until I got home that the full weight of what I'd done finally hit me. As the adrenaline wore off, a nagging sense of doubt began to creep in. Had I gone too far? Would Aaron ever be able to forgive me for such a public shaming? I shook my head, steeling my resolve. No, I couldn't afford to second-guess myself now. Aaron was the one who had brought this upon himself with his lies and infidelity. If anything, he should be grateful I hadn't done worse. Still, when he finally stumbled through the door a few hours later, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of apprehension. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, and for a brief moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Marta," he began, his voice little more than a hoarse whisper, "what you did tonight, I don't even know what to say." I fixed him with a cold, hard stare. "You don't have to say anything, Aaron. I think my actions spoke loud and clear." He winced, as if my words had physically struck him. "I know, and I deserved every bit of that humiliation. But please, you have to believe me when I say that Clara means nothing to me. It was just a fling, a moment of weakness that I deeply regret." I scoffed, shaking my head in disbelief. "Do you really expect me to buy that? After everything you've put me through, all the lies and the sneaking around?" Aaron's shoulders slumped, and for a moment he looked utterly defeated. "You're right, I don't deserve your trust or your forgiveness. But I swear to you, Marta, from the bottom of my heart, I will spend every day making it up to you if you'll just give me another chance." His words hung heavy in the air, and for a brief moment, I actually found myself considering his plea. A part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of the man I had once loved, wanted desperately to believe that he could change, that we could somehow find our way back to the happiness we'd once shared. But then another voice, sharper and more insistent, cut through the haze of doubt. This was just another one of his lies, another empty promise designed to lull me into complacency while he continued his despicable behavior behind my back. "Well, not this time. You know what, Aaron?" I said, my voice taking on a steely edge. "I think I will give you another chance." His head snapped up, his eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. "Really? Oh, Marta, thank you. You won't regret this, I swear." I held up a hand, cutting off his effusive gratitude. "Don't thank me just yet. This is your one and only chance to come clean, to tell me everything about your affair with Clara and any other indiscretions you might have been hiding from me, and if I catch you in even the smallest lie, so help me God, you'll wish you'd never been born." Aaron visibly paled, but to his credit, he didn't back down. "You have my word, Marta. No more lies, no more secrets. I'll tell you everything. I swear it." I nodded, fixing him with a hard stare. "Good. Then you'd better start talking. And Aaron," I added, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "don't leave anything out, because I promise you I will find out eventually. And when I do, there will be hell to pay." As Aaron began to spill his sordid tale, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. He might think he was being given a second chance, but in reality, this was just the calm before the storm. Because no matter what he said, no matter how convincingly he begged for forgiveness, I knew in my heart that our marriage was already dead. Aaron had made his choice, and now it was time for him to face the consequences, and I would be the one to deliver them. In the days following Aaron's tearful confession, I did my best to play the part of the forgiving wife, nodding along as he laid out his grand plans for rebuilding our trust and making amends. But on the inside, I was already plotting my next move. True to his word, Aaron had come clean about the sordid details of his affair with Clara, but what he didn't know was that I had already set the wheels in motion for a far more sinister revenge, one that would make his indiscretions with that little homewrecker seem like child's play. It was Ethan, my old friend from college, who had first tipped me off. A private investigator by trade, he owed me a favor after I'd helped him out of a jam a few years back. And when I reached out to him about digging into Clara's background, what he uncovered was a tangled web of lies and deception that went far deeper than any of us could have imagined. Turned out, Clara's fling with Aaron was about more than just satisfying her twisted desires. No, this was a calculated move, a long con designed to bleed my husband's company dry from the inside out. She's been embezzling funds for months, Ethan explained, sliding a thick manila envelope across the table towards me. Funneling money into offshore accounts, using Aaron's access codes and inside knowledge to cover her tracks. I felt my blood run cold as I flipped through the damning evidence. Bank statements, wire transfer records, all of it meticulously documented and irrefutable. But how? How could she possibly have gotten her hands on that kind of sensitive information? Ethan shrugged, his expression grim. Your guess is as good as mine, but from what I can tell, she's been playing Aaron like a fiddle this whole time, using their affair as a way to keep him blind to her real motives. A wave of nausea washed over me as the full weight of Clara's deception hit me. Not only had the little snake been sleeping with my husband, but she'd also been using him as an unwitting pawn in her twisted game, putting his career and reputation on the line, all for her own selfish gain. In that moment, any lingering shred of sympathy or pity I might have felt for Aaron vanished, replaced by a burning desire to see him, and Clara, get exactly what they deserved. We have to take this to the authorities, I said, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. Get that bitch arrested and make sure Aaron gets dragged down with her for aiding and abetting her crimes. Ethan nodded grimly. You got it. I'll make sure this evidence gets into the right hands, anonymously, of course. Can't have anyone tracing it back to us. I nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Of course. We'll let the wheels of justice do their work for now. But make no mistake, Ethan, by the time this is all over, Clara and Aaron are going to wish they'd never crossed me. As I left Ethan's office, I could already feel the weight of Aaron's deception lifting from my shoulders, replaced by a sense of grim satisfaction. For too long I had been the victim, forced to suffer the humiliation and heartbreak of his betrayal in silence. But not anymore. Now the tables had turned, and it was Aaron's turn to face the consequences of his actions. And this time, there would be no second chances, no empty promises or tearful apologies. This time, he was going to learn the true meaning of karma, and I was going to be the one to deliver it. The days following Ethan's revelation about Clara's embezzlement scheme were some of the most tense and emotionally charged of my life. As much as I tried to maintain a facade of normalcy around Aaron, the simmering fury and resentment I felt towards him made it nearly impossible. Every time I looked at him, I saw not the man I had once loved, but a pathetic fool who had been so blinded by his own selfish desires that he'd allowed himself to be used as a pawn in Clara's twisted game. The thought of it made my skin crawl. Still, I knew I had to keep my composure, at least for the time being. Ethan had assured me that the evidence he'd uncovered would be more than enough to bring Clara's crimes to light, but we needed to bide our time and let the authorities do their work. Of course, that didn't stop Clara herself from trying to worm her way out of the impending disaster. About a week after my meeting with Ethan, I received a frantic call from the little snake herself, practically begging me to meet with her in private. Please, Marta, she pleaded, her voice thick with desperation. I know you must hate me after everything that's happened, but I swear I never meant for things to go this far. I scoffed, barely able to contain my disgust. Save it, Clara. I know all about your little embezzlement scheme and how you've been using my husband as your own personal patsy. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought she might try to deny the accusations. But then, in a small, defeated voice, she spoke again. So that's what this is all about, she murmured. I should have known Ethan would come crawling back to you eventually. I felt a surge of satisfaction at the realization that she knew the jig was up. That's right, Clara. Your little game is over, and you're going to pay for what you've done, both to me and to Aaron. There was a pause, and then she let out a bitter laugh. Aaron? Are you kidding me? That spineless worm was just as complicit in all of this as I was. He knew exactly what was going on, and he was more than happy to turn a blind eye as long as he got to keep sticking his bzdas. Watch your mouth, I snarled, cutting her off mid-sentence. Aaron might be a lying, cheating scumbag, but he's still my husband. And trust me, he'll get what's coming to him too. Clara let out a derisive snort. Yeah, right, like he'll ever face any real consequences for his actions. Men like him always seem to skate by, while the rest of us take the fall. I could hear the bitterness and resentment dripping from her words, and for a brief moment, I almost felt a twinge of pity for her. Almost. Well, not this time, I said, my voice taking on a steely edge. I'll make sure you both get exactly what you deserve, one way or another. There was a long pause, and then Clara spoke again. Her tone resigned. Fine. Do whatever you have to do. Just let me know when and where you want to meet. I at least owe you that much. I smiled grimly to myself, already formulating a plan. Don't worry, Clara. I'll be in touch, and when I do, you'd better be ready to face the consequences of your actions, once and for all. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. The endgame was finally in sight, and soon, both Clara and Aaron would learn the true meaning of karma, and I would be the one to deliver it. The weeks following Clara's arrest were a whirlwind of chaos and turmoil. As the sordid details of her embezzlement scheme came to light, the shockwaves reverberated through Aaron's company, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. At first, Aaron tried desperately to distance himself from the scandal, claiming ignorance and pleading his innocence. But as more evidence of his involvement surfaced, the illicit use of his access codes, the suspicious wire transfers, the damning paper trail that seemed to implicate him at every turn, it became increasingly clear that he was far from the unwitting victim he claimed to be. I watched from the sidelines as his once promising career went up in flames, his reputation dragged through the mud, and his professional life left in tatters. A part of me, the part that still clung to the memories of the man I had once loved, felt a twinge of sadness at seeing him brought so low. But that small flicker of sympathy was quickly extinguished by the knowledge of the depth of his betrayal, not just to me, but to the company he had sworn to serve faithfully. In the end, he had proven himself to be just as selfish and morally bankrupt as Clara, willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of his own twisted desires. As the dust began to settle and the legal proceedings against Clara moved forward, it became clear that Aaron would likely avoid any serious jail time, at least for the time being. The evidence of his direct involvement was simply too circumstantial, the prosecutors claimed, and without Clara's full cooperation, nailing him for aiding and abetting her crimes would be an uphill battle. I should have felt relieved, I suppose. After all, seeing the man I had once loved rot behind bars was never my intention. But as I watched him slink away from the courthouse, his head hung in shame and his once bright future reduced to ashes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hollow victory. Because as much as the authorities might have let him off easy, there was no escaping the fact that his life as he knew it was over. The lies, the betrayal, the utter disregard he had shown for me and our marriage, it had all caught up to him in the end, and now he would be forced to face the consequences for the rest of his days. A few weeks later, as I was packing up the last of my belongings in preparation for my move to a new city, a fresh start, far away from the painful memories of our life together, there was a tentative knock at the door. I already knew who it would be before I opened it. Marta, Aaron said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked haggard, his once handsome features etched with lines of shame and regret. I wanted to apologize one last time, for everything. I regarded him coolly, feeling nothing but a hollow emptiness where the love and affection I had once felt for this man had resided. Your apologies mean nothing to me now, Aaron. You made your choices, and you'll have to live with the consequences. He nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. I know, and I deserve every bit of it after the way I treated you. He trailed off, shaking his head. I hope that someday you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I let out a bitter laugh. Forgive you? Aaron, you're lucky I didn't have you thrown in jail alongside that little tramp you were so eager to risk everything for. A flicker of pain crossed his features, but he didn't argue. We both knew I was right. Just go, Aaron, I said, my voice heavy with finality. Go and try to pick up the pieces of the life you've ruined. As for me, I'm done. Our time together is over, and I'm ready to start fresh. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but then seemed to think better of it. With one last lingering look, he turned and walked away, disappearing from my life for good. As I watched him go, I felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over me. The long, arduous road to revenge was finally at an end, and while the journey had been painful, the satisfaction of seeing karma served made it all worth it in the end. A new chapter was beginning, I realized, one free from the lies and betrayal that had haunted me for so long. And as I took one last look around the empty house that had once been our home, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge might be bittersweet, but it was exactly what I needed to reclaim my life and move forward, stronger and more resilient than ever before. James, why did you sell my car without even asking me? I stood in our brightly lit kitchen, gripping the edge of the countertop. James was lounging on the couch, phone in hand, barely looking up as I spoke. Emma, I told you last week. We needed the money, James replied casually. His voice was indifferent, almost bored. The money? For what? My voice was rising, my patience wearing thin. For the new entertainment system. You saw how outdated the old one was. We deserved an upgrade, James said with a shrug, his eyes glued to a video on his phone. That car was important to me, James. It wasn't just about the money. It was mine. My voice cracked, and I took a deep breath, remembering my grandmother's advice to keep my inheritance secret. I never thought I'd need to follow it so strictly. James finally looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and nonchalance. Come on, Emma, it's just a car. We can get you another one later. I shook my head, frustration boiling over. You didn't even bother to ask me. This isn't just about the car, James. It's about respect and consideration. You can't just make decisions like this on your own. Our suburban home, usually a tranquil retreat, now felt stifling and alien. The neighborhood outside was quiet, with children playing in front yards and neighbors chatting over fences. To the outside world, we were just another happy couple in a tight-knit community. But inside, the cracks were growing deeper every day. James finally set his phone down and stood up, walking towards me. Emma, you're overreacting. It's not like we're broke. I'll buy you another car. End of discussion. His dismissive tone cut through me like a knife. I looked at him, searching for the man I'd married, the man who had once been attentive and kind. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who was slowly bleeding me dry of patience and trust. End of discussion? I repeated, incredulous. You can't just dictate how this goes, James. You've crossed a line, and you don't even see it. James's eyes narrowed. What's really going on here, Emma? You've been acting distant for months. Is there something you're not telling me? I took a step back, realization dawning. My grandmother's advice echoed in my mind. Now, more than ever, I understood why she had been so adamant. Protecting my inheritance wasn't about the money itself. It was about keeping control over something that was truly mine, especially when everything else seemed to be slipping away. I don't know, James. Maybe it's because you've stopped caring about what's important to me, I said quietly. Or maybe it's because you think you can just bulldoze through this marriage, making decisions that suit only you. James scoffed, shaking his head. You're being dramatic. I'm just trying to improve our lives. Your life, I corrected. Improving your life at my expense. He didn't respond, just stared at me with a mixture of frustration and confusion. I realized then that he truly didn't see the problem, or maybe he didn't want to. Either way, it was clear that something had to change, and fast. As James turned back to his phone, dismissing the conversation, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I wasn't going to be sidelined in my own life. Grandma's wisdom was a guiding light, and it was time I started listening to it more carefully. Tension hung heavily in the air as I walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let James's betrayal define me. This was only the beginning, and I had my own plans to make. Claire, I don't know what to do anymore, I said, dropping onto her couch. The floral print cushions smelled faintly of lilac. Claire looked up from her magazine, instantly concerned. Emma, what happened? Did James do something again? I sighed heavily, running my fingers through my hair. He sold my car without even asking me, just traded it for some stupid entertainment system. Claire's eyes widened in shock. Seriously? Who sells someone's car without asking? That's insane. Yes, and he acted like it wasn't a big deal, just brushed it off like I was overreacting. My voice wavered as I recounted the morning's confrontation. He's been doing this for a while now, hasn't he? Claire asked softly. I nodded. It didn't start this way. When we first got together, he was so kind, so attentive. I felt like I was the center of his universe. But now, I let the sentence hang, unfinished. Claire squeezed my hand reassuringly. Have you thought about leaving him? You don't have to stay in a situation like this, Emma. I bit my lip, hesitating. I have, but it's complicated. We've built a life together, and it's not easy to just walk away. Claire's face was etched with concern. You have to do what's best for you. Always remember that. Later that evening, as I cleaned up the dinner dishes James had left behind, I started thinking about the early days of our relationship. I remembered the picnics in the park, the surprise weekend getaways. He used to plan everything so meticulously, making sure every moment was special. But that James was long gone, replaced by someone who seemed to care more about his gadgets and parties than about me. While scrubbing the last of the pots, I noticed the flashy new entertainment system taking up half the living room. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through James's social media. My heart sank when I saw the photos of his recent parties, extravagant and filled with friends I barely knew. Numerous gadgets cluttered our home, all bought with the money he got from selling my car. I fumed silently, deciding to confront him again when he came home. The door creaked open as James stumbled in, the smell of alcohol clinging to him. James, where have you been? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed drunkenly. Out with the guys, needed a break, you know? I took a deep breath. I saw the photos, all those expensive gadgets and parties. Is that where the money from my car went? James looked at me, his eyes unfocused. Come on, Emma. Don't start with this again. It's just stuff. We're having fun. Fun without considering my feelings? I snapped. This is beyond disrespectful, James, that you're ignoring everything I care about. James rolled his eyes, slumping into the couch. Why don't you ever chill out? You used to be fun. Tears of frustration stung my eyes. This isn't about fun, James. It's about you taking everything I care about and tossing it aside. He didn't respond, eyes already closing as he passed out on the couch. The sound of his snoring filled the room, but it couldn't drown out the anger and hurt simmering in my chest. I stood there for a moment, looking at the man who once promised to cherish me. Claire's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it was time to make a change, to find the strength Grandma had always believed I had. This betrayal wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of something new, and I was ready to fight for the life I deserved. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, phone in hand. I needed to talk to my parents. I dialed my mom's number and waited. Emma, sweetheart, how are you? My mom answered, her voice warm and comforting. Mom, things with James, they're worse than ever, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, honey, what happened? She asked, her tone immediately concerned. I quickly explained the car situation and James's ongoing disregard for my feelings. I'm considering divorce, Mom. I can't do this anymore. There was a pause on the line. Emma, we've always supported you, no matter what. Your father and I will help you through this. And remember, you have your inheritance. I know, Mom. I might need to use it to move out and start over, I admitted, feeling a small twinge of relief saying it out loud. We'll support you, darling. Do what you need to do, she assured me. As I ended the call, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. It was time to take action. I started drafting an email to a lawyer, seeking advice on the next steps for divorce and considering apartments in a nearby town. After a few hours, I felt more determined than ever. That evening, I kept my phone close, anticipating a reply from the lawyer. As I sat on the couch, James entered the room, eyes suspicious. What have you been doing all day? He asked, his tone accusatory. Just sorting some things out, I replied, keeping my answers vague. James eyed my phone. Who were you talking to earlier? Mom, I needed some advice, I said, avoiding his gaze. Before I knew it, James snatched my phone from my hand. What the hell, James? Give it back! I yelled, lunging after him. He scrolled through my messages, his face darkening. Thinking about leaving me, huh? His voice was laced with anger. Give me my phone, James, now. My voice was firm, even though my heart was pounding. James's eyes flashed dangerously. You think you can just run away with that little inheritance of yours? Everything should go to us, not just you. You've been hiding it all this time? My mind raced. I didn't have to tell you everything. That money was meant to give me security. You're gonna use it to get away from me? He spat, stepping closer. I stood my ground. Yes, James, if that's what it takes, I'm done. He threw the phone on the couch, stepping back, but his expression was still livid. You won't get far with that money. You owe me, Emma. We're in this together. We were in this together, James. You're the one who turned it into something else, I said coldly. James stared at me, seething, before storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. My hands were shaking, but I felt a rush of determination. This couldn't go on any longer. I had my plan. I was going to make it out of this mess one way or another. The email dinged, signaling a new message from the lawyer. I quickly opened it and read through the advice, solidifying my resolve. It was time to take the next step. I packed a small bag with essentials, calling Claire to give her a heads up. She answered on the first ring. Claire, can I stay with you for a while? I'm leaving tonight. Emma, of course. Come right over. We'll figure this out together, Claire said, her voice unwavering. Grabbing my bag, I took one last look around the house that had become more a prison than a home. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. I arrived at Claire's house, still gripping the small suitcase. Claire opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug. You did the right thing, Emma, she whispered. Thanks, Claire, I replied, stepping inside. We sat down in her living room, the warm ambiance a stark contrast to the cold tension I'd left behind. So what's the plan? Claire asked, handing me a cup of tea. I contacted a lawyer. Tomorrow I'll start looking for a new place and a job. I need to be independent, both emotionally and financially, I explained, taking a sip. Claire nodded. You know you can stay here as long as you need to. We've got this. The next morning, I woke up early, ready to tackle my to-do list. Claire drove me around town, helping me check out apartments. We found a cozy one-bedroom that felt just right. I put down a deposit and scheduled a move-in date. Later, I sat at Claire's kitchen table, laptop open, applying for jobs. The task was tedious but necessary. It wasn't long before emails and phone calls started coming in. By evening, I had lined up several interviews. As I celebrated these small victories with Claire, my phone rang. It was James. My heart raced, but I answered. Emma, where are you? He demanded, his tone aggressive. That's none of your business, I said, trying to stay calm. It is my business. We're married. You can't just walk out, he barked. I had to. You left me no choice, I replied firmly. James scoffed. You think you're brave now, hiding at Claire's? This is our problem, not hers. Tell me where you are. I'm not hiding, and it's not just Claire's problem. I'm done being treated like I don't matter, I said, my voice steady. You owe me, Emma. For the mortgage, the bills, everything. You think you can just run off with your inheritance and leave me to deal with everything? His desperation was palpable. This isn't about money, James. It's about respect, or your lack of it, I said, tears filling my eyes. You'll regret this, Emma, he hissed before hanging up. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. Claire looked at me, concern etched on her face. He won't stop, will he? She said softly. Not easily, I admitted, steeling myself. The next few days flew by in a blur of apartment preparations and job interviews. I felt stronger each day, my resolve hardening. One evening, while I was organizing my new apartment, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from James. You're making a huge mistake. You'll come crawling back. They always do. I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I typed back quickly. No, James, I'm done crawling. This is my life now. I hit send and blocked his number. Standing by the window, I watched the sun setting over my new neighborhood, feeling a sense of freedom. The next morning, I went to my first job interview. Walking into the office, I was greeted by a friendly receptionist who led me through the process. The interview went well, and I left feeling hopeful. Returning to my new apartment, I found Claire waiting with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," she toasted, handing me a glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking glasses. As we sat and talked, I realized I was beginning to reclaim my life. Each step forward was a step away from James and his toxic influence. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all I'd left behind and everything that lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. A week later, I got the call offering me the job. I smiled, tears of joy streaming down my face. It was a sign that I was on the right path. I was building a new life, one step at a time, and it was a life where I mattered. The town's annual fair was in full swing. Kids sprinted between booths, their laughter mingling with the cheerful hum of the crowd. I was helping Claire set up her jewelry stall when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Emma," Jack's familiar voice greeted me. He was a mutual friend, someone dependable who'd always been kind. "Oh, hey, Jack, how's it going?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Pretty good. But hey, I heard about you and James. Are you okay?" Jack's concern was evident. I sighed. "It's been rough, but I'm getting through it." Jack nodded, but his face turned cautious. "Speaking of James, he's here. And, well, he isn't handling things well." Before I could ask what he meant, a loud commotion drew our attention. James was in the middle of the fairground, visibly intoxicated, shouting at a group of young men gathered around a barbecue pit. "Oh no," I whispered, feeling my stomach knot. "Hey, it's none of your business!" James yelled, pushing one of the men. The crowd's murmur grew louder, eyes turning toward the spectacle. I took a deep breath. I need to handle this. "Emma, are you sure?" Claire asked, worry etched on her face. "I have to," I replied, squaring my shoulders and weaving through the crowd. As I approached, James spotted me and stumbled over. "Emma, there you are. Thought you could avoid me forever?" He slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. "James, you're making a scene. Let's talk somewhere else," I urged, trying to stay calm. He laughed bitterly. "Why? So you can walk out again? You think you're so much better now?" "James, you're drunk. This isn't the place," I said firmly. "Everyone should know how you abandoned your husband," James shouted, his voice carrying over the crowd. I could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on us, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Anger and embarrassment churned inside me, but I wouldn't let him drag me back down. "James, we're done. You need to accept that," I said, my voice steady. "Now please, go home before you make this worse." "Worse? You think this can get worse?" His eyes were wild, unhinged. "You owe me, Emma. You can't just walk away without paying your dues." "I don't owe you anything, James. I'm done being your pawn," I replied, stepping back as he moved closer. A friend intervened, grabbing James by the arm. "Come on, man. Let's get you out of here." James struggled, but was eventually pulled away, his furious eyes locked on mine. "You're going to regret this, Emma." As he was dragged off, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Claire appeared by my side, her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "Yes, it had to be done," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. We continued setting up the stall, the mood around us slowly returning to normal. But I noticed several sympathetic looks from people who'd witnessed the altercation. Hours passed and the fair wore on, becoming a blur of faces and activities. That evening, after packing up, I drove to my new apartment. Walking in, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. I was finally free of James's constant manipulation, even if the road ahead was still uncertain. I spent the next few days settling in, gradually feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. One morning, I walked over to the mirror in my new bedroom and caught my reflection. There was a spark in my eyes, one that had been missing for a long time. This was my life, my space, and my chance to rebuild. The memory of James's public meltdown was still fresh, but it only fueled my resolve. I was moving forward, and nothing he did would pull me back. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. Today was just another step, and step by step I was reclaiming my future. One morning, a week after the fair, I was getting ready for my first day at the new job when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jack. "Emma, can we meet up? There's something you need to know about James." My curiosity piqued. I agreed to meet him at the local coffee shop after work. The day passed quickly, filled with training and meeting new colleagues. By evening, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated. At the coffee shop, Jack was already waiting with 2 drinks. He waved me over, his expression serious. "Thanks for coming, Emma," he said, sliding one of the cups over to me. "No problem, Jack. What's going on?" I asked, taking a sip. Jack took a deep breath. "James lost his job, the company downsized, and he was let go." I blinked in surprise. "I didn't know that. He hasn't contacted me since the fair." "Yeah, he's not taking it well," Jack continued. "He's been telling people you left him at the worst possible time, trying to play the victim, but there's more." I leaned in, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "He's planning something, Emma. He told a mutual friend he's going to try to win you back so he can get his hands on your inheritance." Anger flared inside me. "He really thinks he can manipulate me again?" Jack nodded. "He's desperate, Emma. You need to be careful." "Thanks for the warning, Jack. I'll stay vigilant," I said, my resolve hardening. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. James losing his job changed things, making him more unpredictable. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, my mind racing. I needed to be prepared for whatever scheme he cooked up. The next few days were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new routine. One evening, as I was organizing my closet, there was a knock at the door. I hesitated, peering through the peephole. It was James. "Emma, open up. We need to talk," he called, his voice shaky. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door slightly, leaving the chain on. "What do you want, James?" He looked disheveled, clearly stressed. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything. I've lost my job. I need your help." "You need my help," I repeated, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" "Please, Emma, we can work this out. Think about what we had," he pleaded, trying to sound genuine. "What we had, James, is over. You made sure of that," I replied firmly. His demeanor shifted, his eyes flashing with anger. "You can't leave me like this. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I said, slamming the door shut and locking it. I could hear James banging on the door, shouting, but I leaned against it, breathing deeply. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, and I heard him leave. I checked the peephole to make sure he was gone before calling Claire. "Emma, what's wrong?" she asked, hearing the panic in my voice. James showed up at my apartment. "He's acting desperate and unhinged," I explained. "Stay calm, Emma. You need to protect yourself." "Consider getting a restraining order," Claire suggested. "I'll look into it." "Thanks, Claire," I said, feeling a bit more anchored after talking to her. The next morning, I called the lawyer to discuss my options. He advised me to document everything and start the process for a restraining order. I followed his advice, keeping a log of every interaction with James. Days turned into weeks, and I focused on building my new life. One afternoon, while taking a break at work, I saw a familiar face across the street. It was James, watching me. My heart pounded, but I straightened my shoulders and continued with my day. This was my life now, my chance to be free. No matter how desperate James became, I wasn't going back. This was about reclaiming my future, and I was determined not to let him take that away from me. The moment I stepped out of my building, I saw James sitting on a bench across the street. His eyes locked onto mine, and he stood up, walking towards me. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. I quickened my pace, determined not to engage with him, but he caught up to me before I could reach the corner. "Emma, wait," James called out, reaching for my arm. I yanked my arm away, anger flaring. "What do you want, James? I've told you it's over." "Just hear me out," he pleaded, desperation clear in his voice. "I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's been hard without you. We can make this work again." I stared at him, incredulous. "You really think I'd come back after everything? You manipulated, lied, and used me. There's nothing left to fix." James looked around, a flicker of anger passing over his face. "We were married, Emma. That means working through the tough times." "I did work through the tough times, James, alone, while you partied and spent money you didn't have," I shot back, feeling a rush of righteous indignation. A passerby slowed down, eyes widening at the commotion, but I stood my ground. The whole world might as well know what I've been through. James's posture shifted from pleading to confrontational. "You want people to think I'm the bad guy? You've been hiding money, living this new life while I'm struggling." "Living this new life isn't easy, but it's necessary," I said, trying to keep calm. "I need peace, James, something you can't seem to offer." His eyes darkened. "You think you're better than me now? No, James. I think I deserve better than how you treated me, I replied, turning to walk away. James grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. This isn't over, Emma. You're not getting rid of me that easily. Get your hands off me, I yelled, drawing the attention of more bystanders. James's grip loosened, but the venom in his eyes remained. A tall man in a suit stepped forward. Is everything all right here? He asked, eyeing James warily. Yes, thank you, I answered quickly. I was just leaving. James glared at the man, but took a step back. This isn't over, he repeated, his voice low and threatening. Ignoring his parting words, I hurried away, my heart pounding. This encounter couldn't scare me into submission. It only made me more resolute. Back at my apartment, I immediately called my lawyer. James is stalking me. I need to escalate this. What are my options? We can file for a restraining order immediately, he replied. Document today's incident in detail and we'll proceed. Hours later, while I completed the necessary paperwork, a sense of empowerment washed over me. Finally, action was being taken to protect my newfound peace. The next week passed without incident until I received a call from an unknown number. My heart sank when I heard his voice again. Emma, you think a piece of paper will keep me away? You have no idea what I'm capable of, James hissed before the line went dead. Trembling with a mix of fear and fury, I called the police and reported the threat, adding it to the growing case against him. This pattern of intimidation and control would end here. A day later, Claire called me with surprising news. Emma, people are talking. They know about James's behavior. He's losing friends and support left and right. Good, I said, feeling a sense of vindication. He's finally getting what he deserves. As I hung up, I felt an unexpected wave of relief. James's grip on my life was weakening. The community was seeing his true colors, just as I had. I stood by the window, looking out at the bustling evening street below. My journey towards freedom was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. James's fall from grace had begun, and I was reclaiming my future one step at a time. Weeks had passed, and life was slowly returning to a semblance of normal. I was flourishing at my new job, finding satisfaction in the work and camaraderie with my colleagues. Evenings were filled with laughter and support from Claire, who had become my rock. One afternoon I was engrossed in crafting a presentation when my phone buzzed. It was from Jack. Hey Emma, are you free to meet for coffee later? Something you should know. My curiosity piqued, I agreed. We met at the little cafe by my office. Jack was already there, looking concerned. Emma, thanks for meeting me, he greeted, gesturing to the seat across from him. No problem, Jack. What's going on? I asked, sitting down. It's about James. He's not doing well. He's been trying to get people to turn against you, but it's backfiring. People see him for what he is now, Jack explained. Relief washed over me. Good, he needs to face the consequences. But there's more. James got into some trouble with the law. Drunk driving. He's lost even more support, Jack continued. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pity. Thanks for telling me, Jack. I needed to hear that. After our coffee, I decided to take a walk through the park. The cool breeze and the rustling of leaves felt liberating. It was here I bumped into James, looking disheveled and defeated. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, his eyes darkened. Well, look who it is, he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. James, please. I don't want any trouble, I replied, keeping my distance. You've ruined everything for me, Emma. You and your lies, he spat, his face contorting with anger. Lies, James? The only person who ruined your life is you. Your actions have consequences, I retorted. He took a shaky step closer. Consequences? I've lost everything, my respect, friends, all because of you. I stood my ground. No, James, it's because of your choices. I simply refuse to be your victim anymore. His expression wavered, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. You think you're free of me? This isn't over. Before he could say anything more, 2 police officers approached. Mr. Miller? One of them asked. James turned, his bravado melting away. Yes? You're under arrest for violating the restraining order. You were warned to stay away from Ms. Miller, the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. James's face turned pale. Emma, you can stop this. Tell them it's a mistake, he pleaded, panic in his voice. I shook my head. No, James, this ends now. The officers led him away, and I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was truly over. Returning to my apartment that evening, I found a letter in the mail. Opening it, I discovered I had been approved for a higher position at work, a promotion. It felt like the universe was giving me a sign that I was on the right path. I called Claire to share the good news, and she was ecstatic. We celebrated with a small dinner at my place, toasting to new beginnings and the end of a dark chapter. That night, I took a moment to reflect on my journey. From the betrayal that shattered my world to the steps I took to rebuild it. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed and had reclaimed my life piece by piece. Walking through the bustling streets the next day, I felt lighter. The weight of past traumas was lifting, replaced by a sense of empowerment and hope. I deserved this new life. A life where my worth was not dictated by someone else's whims. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of someone familiar. James, disheveled and on the edge, standing outside a convenience store, clearly struggling. Our eyes briefly met, but there was no connection left. I walked on, a silent resolve in my heart. James's downfall was complete. My future, bright and full of possibilities, was just beginning, and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. Either you leave now, or we both leave together when I set fire to this lying hell, I said, holding up the lighter closer to Derek's prized photographs. He stared at me as sweat trickled down his forehead. You wouldn't dare. The room felt like it would explode. Derek sat on the edge of the couch, his usually neat hair disheveled. His eyes darted from me to the flame and back. There was an urgent, almost desperate edge to his voice. Laura, this is ridiculous. Put that down. My hand trembled, but I kept the lighter steady. Ridiculous? You think this is ridiculous? What's ridiculous is you spending our money on someone else while claiming we're broke. He blinked rapidly, searching for the words. What are you talking about? Where's this coming from? The box, Derek? The one you thought you hid so well in the closet. Receipts for gifts, dinners, everything. All for someone named Emily. For a moment, Derek was silent. His face changed, hardening in a way that poured ice into my veins. Laura, you don't understand. There are things, it's not what you think. Using my free hand, I pulled out the receipts, throwing them at him. They fluttered down like a damning rain. Tell me, Derek, what do I not understand? Because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear. Derek sighed, standing and walking towards the door. For a moment, I thought he was going to leave. Look, let's talk about this rationally. No need for threats or violence. Rational? You want rational? I laughed, a harsh sound in the tense room. You've been lying to me for God knows how long, and now you want to talk? He held up his hands as if trying to calm a wild animal. Listen, we can figure this out. Put down the lighter and we can... I cut him off. Or we can what? Pretend everything's fine? Keep lying to each other. I felt my resolve waver and took a deep breath, steadying myself. No, Derek, I'm done pretending. His cool demeanor cracked for a second, showing just a hint of fear. Fine, you're right, I messed up, but can we please talk about this? I lowered the lighter slightly but kept my eyes locked onto his. Talk? Yeah, we'll talk, but not here, not now. Derek took a step forward, cautiously. What do you want, Laura? This is getting out of hand. I turned and grabbed my bag, stuffing it with whatever important documents I had tucked away. I want out. For good. And you're going to let me go without a fight. He moved closer, standing just a few feet away. And if I don't, I met his gaze, unblinking, then you'll wish you never met me. There was a silence, thick with unspoken threats and broken promises. Derek exhaled and looked away, defeated. Fine. Just put the lighter down. We'll talk. I didn't trust the softness in his voice, but I nodded and put the lighter in my pocket. Okay, but remember, Derek, I've got proof. Proof of everything. Don't test me. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I saw the man I once loved buried under layers of deceit and betrayal. I wouldn't dare. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the shattered pieces of a life I once thought was perfect. As I stepped into the cool night air, I felt the weight of freeing myself and the immense challenge ahead, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. As I left the house, the cold air hit me, snapping me into reality. I got into my car and drove aimlessly for a bit, my mind swirling with thoughts of betrayal and anger. I remembered how things used to be, how Derek used to make me laugh, how we used to plan our future together. It felt like a different lifetime. It was late when I pulled up to Sophia's house. I almost didn't want to disrupt her family, but I had no other place to go. I knocked softly, and moments later, Sophia opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Laura, what are you doing here?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "I need to talk. Can I come in?" I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She stepped aside, letting me in. We sat on her couch with the soft hum of the baby monitor in the background. I told her everything, from the hidden receipts to confronting Derek. Her face grew angrier with each detail. "That jerk! I can't believe he did this to you. How long has this been going on?" Sophia's eyes were blazing with protectiveness. "A year, maybe more," I said, feeling the weight of the betrayal more heavily now. "And I think it's been going on since a year into our marriage." Sophia clenched her fists. "You need to get evidence, solid proof. Have you checked his phone, emails, anything?" I sighed. "I found a hidden phone in his office earlier. It's filled with messages to Emily. That's how I know her name." She reached for her phone. "You need to gather all the evidence you can. Make sure he can't deny it. Then we'll figure out your next steps." I nodded. Sophia's determination was infectious. "Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you." "You're stronger than you think, Laura. We'll get through this together." The next day, I pretended nothing had happened. Derek avoided me, his gaze cold and distant. That night, with Derek snoring in the next room, I snuck into his office. I found the hidden phone and quietly scrolled through the messages. They were worse than I'd imagined: romantic getaways, expensive dinners, even plans for a future together. My blood boiled. One message caught my eye. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow at the usual place. XO Emily." I decided to follow him. The next day, I watched him drive to a fancy restaurant, meeting a younger woman, Emily. I took countless pictures through the window, each click of the camera deepening my resolve. Later, I sat in my car, the weight of my findings settling over me. I couldn't confront him now, not yet. There was still more to uncover. Days passed, and Derek continued his deceitful routine, blissfully unaware of my silent pursuit. I documented everything, gathering enough evidence to topple his world. One night, as Derek went out again, I sat across from Sophia with all my gathered evidence spread out before us. "This is it," I said, my voice firm. "I've got enough proof now." Sophia looked at me, admiration in her eyes. "So what's your plan?" I took a deep breath, feeling the cold sting of determination. "First, I need a lawyer. Someone who can guide me through this mess without Derek suspecting. I won't go down without a fight." Sophia nodded. "I know someone, David. He's tough and discreet. He'll help you." I leaned back, exhaustion mingling with relief. "Thanks, I'm ready to fight back now." As I left her house that night, I promised myself I wouldn't let Derek's betrayal define me. This was just the beginning of my journey to reclaim my life. No more living in the shadows of lies. It was time to take control. David was the perfect choice. When Sophia introduced us, he got straight to the point. "So tell me everything, Laura. Leave no detail out," he said, sitting across from me in his cramped office. We spent hours going through every piece of evidence I had gathered. He nodded approvingly as I laid out the photos, messages, and receipts. "Good job documenting everything. This will be crucial," David said, shuffling the papers. "But we need more than just proof of his affair. We need to expose his financial abuses, too." I took a deep breath. "I've been looking into our finances. Derek has been hiding debt, spending money recklessly while keeping me in the dark. I've been the main financial supporter without even realizing it." David frowned. "And you've sacrificed your own career goals for his, right?" I nodded, memories of missed opportunities and neglected dreams flashing through my mind. "Yes, I put everything on hold for him, believing his promises." David looked grim. "We need bank statements and any financial records you can find. He can't deny hard evidence." That night, while Derek was asleep, I tiptoed to his office. I rummaged through his desk drawers, finally finding a locked box. Using the key I had swiped earlier, I opened it to find stacks of bills, credit statements, and loan forms. My heart sank as I realized just how deep Derek's financial mess went. The next day, I handed everything over to David. He sorted through the documents, shaking his head. "This is going to demolish him, exactly what we need." At home, Derek became more distant and dismissive. One evening, I ventured to talk about our financial situation. "Derek, we need to talk about our money issues. Things don't add up," I said calmly. He glared at me, annoyed. "I handle the finances, Laura." Just focus on your work, all right? I stared at him, anger bubbling just below the surface. I think I have a right to know, considering my income basically funds everything. His eyes flashed with irritation. God, Laura, must you always question everything? Leave it alone. I clenched my fists under the table. If you'd been honest, I wouldn't have to. The argument ended with Derek storming out, leaving me feeling both angry and justified. This only strengthened my resolve to bring everything to light. A week later, David found me taking a break from work. You've done well, Laura. We're ready to confront him. My suggestion, tomorrow. I felt a surge of determination. Fine, let's do it. Later that night, I went through everything one last time. I visualized the moment I would lay it all out in front of him, each lie crumbling like a house of cards. The next evening, Derek walked in, his tie loose, looking exhausted. He barely acknowledged me as he sat down. I stood up, holding the stack of evidence. We need to talk. Now, I said firmly. He looked up, bored. What is it now? Another one of your baseless accusations. I slammed the stack onto the table. No, Derek. These are facts. Derek's face turned pale as he glanced at the documents. What is this? Proof of everything. Your affair, your lies, your financial mess. It's all here. He snatched the papers, flipping through them. His face contorted with anger. You've been spying on me? Yes, I said calmly. And now everyone will know the kind of person you really are. His eyes burned with fury. You think you can ruin me? I won't go down without a fight, Laura. I met his glare, unflinching. Neither will I. As I walked away, I felt an immense sense of relief. This was just the beginning, but I was ready for the battle ahead. Derek's control over me was over, and my plan was in motion. It was time to reclaim my life. I could barely sleep. The showdown with Derek left me restless and tense. David assured me our next step was crystal clear. We've got him cornered, Laura. Now's the time to confront him with everything we've got. The next morning, I prepared myself. I was ready for the final talk. When Derek came home that evening, the tension between us was electric. He knew something was off. Laura, what's with the cold shoulder? We need to clear the air, he said, trying to sound reasonable. But I saw through him. We do, I replied, holding up the investigator's report David had handed me. And I've got all the proof I need. He narrowed his eyes, suspicion creeping into his gaze. What are you talking about? I hired a private investigator. I have photos of you with Emily spending our money like it's water. And there's more, details on your financial irresponsibility, I said, keeping my voice even though my heart was pounding. Derek's face twisted with anger and disbelief. You had no right to do that. I had every right, I shot back. You've been lying and cheating for years. This is your mess, Derek, not mine. He lunged forward, grabbing the report from my hands and slamming it on the table. You think this will destroy me? Think again, Laura. I stood my ground. This is your doing. You broke us. I'm just making sure you can't deny it. His eyes turned cold. You want to leave? Fine, but you won't get a penny from me. I laughed, a hollow sound in the stifling room. You really think you can bully me into staying? I've already taken steps to secure what's mine. He sneered. You think you're so clever, but you're just playing a dangerous game. Maybe, I said, grabbing my bag, but I'm done being afraid of you. I turned to leave, but Derek grabbed my arm. This isn't over, Laura. You can't just walk away from everything. I pulled free and faced him. Watch me, I replied, venom in every word. I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Outside, the cool air felt like freedom. I drove to David's office, where we finalized the plan. I outlined every detail with a steady hand, making sure each move was calculated to perfection. We're in this together, Laura, David said, his tone reassuring. You're doing the right thing. The next day, I started extracting my money from our joint accounts. I set up separate accounts in my name, ensuring Derek couldn't touch a dime. Over the next few days, I discreetly moved the majority of our savings. Derek started to sense something was up. He became more demanding, checking our accounts, questioning me constantly. But I stayed calm, playing along. The money's safe, Derek. You need to trust me, I would say, my face betraying nothing. Finally, the day came when the balance tipped in my favor. With the help of David and Sophia, I had everything I needed. I was financially independent, and Derek had no idea how close he was to losing everything. I called a meeting with Derek, Sophia, and David present. Derek strutted in, confidence masking his unease. What's this about? I laid out the accounts, the statements, every transaction he thought he'd hidden. This is about your lies catching up to you. He glanced at David, then back at me. You can't do this. Watch me, I said calmly. David stepped forward. Legally, Laura's in the clear. You've been dishonest, Derek. Now you face the consequences. Derek's face fell, fury and fear battling for control. You'll regret this, he spat, but there was no power behind his words. No, Derek, I replied, standing tall. You're the one who'll regret it. As I left with Sophia and David by my side, I felt the weight lifting. This was far from over, but I was ready. Derek's control was shattered, and I was finally free to reclaim my life. The first steps had been taken, and I wouldn't stop until I saw this through to the end. I moved into Sophia and John's guest room the next day. They insisted I stay as long as I needed. Derek's threats from the previous night echoed in my mind, but I refused to let them shake me. Sophia was a rock of support. One morning over coffee, she said, Laura, you're doing amazing, but you need allies. People who can support you both emotionally and practically. I know, I replied, sipping my coffee. But who do I turn to? Derek made sure to isolate me. Sophia leaned in. We'll start with family and close friends who can offer real help. People you trust. That night, we called my older brother Mike and explained everything. He met us at a local diner, his face a mask of concern and anger. Laura, I had no idea it was this bad, Mike said, gripping my hand tightly. You should have told me sooner. I didn't want to worry you, I said, tears in my eyes. But I need your support now more than ever. Mike's expression hardened. You have it. Anything you need, just ask. Next, I reached out to a few trusted friends. Over the following days, Sophia, John, Mike, and I formed a small but solid support network. They helped me with everything from logistics to emotional encouragement. Meanwhile, David and I were busy making final preparations to secure my independent financial stability. I transferred more funds into my private account, ensuring I had enough to start fresh once I left for good. One evening, Sophia came into the guest room with a smile. John and I have been talking. You should come stay with us until you get back on your feet. We have plenty of room. I shook my head, touched by their generosity. I don't want to impose. Nonsense, John said, appearing in the doorway. We're family, and you need a stable place to stay. I hugged them both, feeling grateful. I'll stay, but I don't want to be a burden. You're never a burden, Sophia said firmly. We'll get through this together. David called later that week with good news. Laura, we've made significant progress. Financially, you're secure. Now it's time to ensure Derek feels the consequences of his actions. What do you mean? I asked, curious. We need to expose him in a way that leaves no room for him to deny or twist the truth. Make sure everyone knows who he really is. A plan started to form in my mind. A way to reveal Derek's betrayal to our entire social circle. An anniversary party, I said slowly. A surprise anniversary party where I can show everyone the truth. David chuckled. That's bold, but it could work. Let's do it. We set the date and made meticulous plans. Invitations went out secretly, and on the night of the party, Sophia and John helped me set everything up at their place. The house was filled with friends, family, and Derek's colleagues. Derek arrived, surprised and pleased by the unexpected celebration. He glanced around, probably thinking he had managed to win me back without even trying. He gave his usual charming smile, oblivious to the storm about to hit. As the night went on, I excused myself to prepare the final pièce de résistance to the visitor. With everyone gathered in the living room, I stood up, holding a glass of wine. Thank you all for coming to celebrate, I began, my voice steady. Derek and I owe you an honest look at our relationship. Derek looked confused, but he didn't suspect anything yet. I clicked a remote, and the slideshow began. Images and messages flashed across the screen, detailing his affair and financial deception. Gasps filled the room. Derek's face turned ashen as he tried to stand, but John blocked his way. Stay, John said quietly but firmly. As the final image lingered on the screen, a message from Derek to Emily about their future together, Derek's colleagues and our friends turned to him, their expressions filled with shock and disgust. Derek, I said, breaking the heavy silence, this is the truth. This is who you are. Derek's mask finally fell. He looked around, realizing the depth of his unraveling. Laura, you can't do this. But I held my ground, surrounded by my newfound allies. Oh, but I did. The room buzzed with whispers, and I saw Derek's reputation crumble before my eyes. This was just the beginning of his downfall, and I was ready for whatever came next. The aftermath of the anniversary party left a chasm that Derek couldn't ignore. Back at home, his fury exploded. "How could you do this to me?" he screamed, his face red with rage. "You've ruined everything." I stood my ground, nerves steely. "I showed everyone the truth, Derek. You ruined everything yourself." "You think you're so clever, don't you?" he sneered. "You've got nothing without me." "You're wrong. I have everything I need now." I leaned in, my voice low and cold. "And you? You have nothing left but shame." He lunged, and for a second I thought he'd hit me. But he stopped short, his hands clenching and unclenching. "This isn't over, Laura. You'll pay for this." "We'll see," I said, stepping away. "I'm leaving, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The next day, I moved the rest of my belongings to Sophia and John's place. Derek tried calling, texting, even showing up at their door, but John was always there to send him packing. David delivered more good news soon after. "Derek's reputation is in shambles. He's losing clients fast. Word spreads quickly." I nodded, feeling a grim satisfaction. "Good." With Derek destabilized, I contacted Emily. She needed to know the kind of man she was involved with. We arranged to meet at a cafe downtown. Emily was younger than I expected, with wide eyes that betrayed her nerves. "Why are we meeting?" she asked tentatively. I took a deep breath. "You need to hear this. Derek isn't who he says he is. He's been cheating on me a long time, lying to both of us." She looked stunned. "What?" "No, Derek said he and his wife were having problems." "Yeah, because he caused them," I said, handing her a file David had helped me prepare. "Read this. It's all the evidence of his deceit." She flipped through the file, her expression shifting from shock to disgust. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I believe you," I replied softly, "but you deserve to know the truth and to decide what to do with it." Emily looked up, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for telling me. I need to cut ties with him." "Be careful," I warned. "Derek's not just a cheater. He's dangerous when cornered." Emily nodded. "I'll end it. Thanks for opening my eyes." Days later, as I began rebuilding my life, word came that Emily had left Derek. Derek's spiral deepened. No girlfriend, no reputation, no support. David's updates confirmed Derek's decline, each piece of news like a weight lifting off my shoulders. One afternoon, I met with David and Sophia. "What's next?" I asked. David smiled. "You've done more than enough damage. Now, it's about securing your future." Sophia leaned in, her gaze intent. "You need to move out of the shadow of this mess. Start fresh." I nodded, determination burning in my chest. "I'm ready." The next day, I began packing my things, preparing to move into a small, cozy apartment I had secured. It was a new start, a space that was mine alone. Derek tried reaching out once more, showing up at the apartment just as I was unpacking. "Laura, please, let's talk," he pleaded, looking broken. I met his eyes with a hard stare. "There's nothing left to say. Leave before I call the police." He stood there, desperation in his eyes. "I'll fix this, I promise." "You had your chance, Derek. It's too late." He left, shoulders slumped, the full impact of his downfall finally sinking in. Watching him walk away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and triumph. As I settled into my new place, I focused on my future. I reconnected with my passions, old friends, and embraced the solitude. Life was different, and it was mine to shape. One evening, as the sun set behind the cityscape, I looked around my new home, feeling a profound sense of peace. No more lies, no more fear, just freedom and the promise of new beginnings. Walking down the street, I felt lighter, more confident. Derek's shadow no longer darkened my path. This was my journey, and it had only just begun. Derek's life was unraveling fast. Without my financial support, his house of cards collapsed. Rumors of his infidelity and financial deceit spread like wildfire, reaching his clients and colleagues. One day, I ran into an old acquaintance, Sarah, at a cafe. Her face lit up when she saw me. "Laura, it's been ages." We chatted briefly before she leaned in, her expression turning serious. "I heard about Derek. Is it true?" "Every word," I said, not holding back. "He lied, cheated, and drained our finances. I had to expose him." Sarah shook her head, sympathy in her eyes. "What a mess." "I'm so sorry, Laura." "It needed to happen," I replied. "I'm rebuilding now, focusing on myself." She smiled. "Good for you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." It wasn't long before Derek hit rock bottom. One evening, David called with an update. Derek's been let go from his job. His colleagues lost all respect for him. He deserves it, I said, feeling a grim satisfaction. What's next for him? David sighed. He'll likely try to find new work, but with his reputation, it won't be easy. I nodded, thinking about how far I'd come. Thanks, David. I appreciate everything you've done. As days turned into weeks, Derek's desperation grew. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, I answered. Laura, it's Derek, his voice cracked, full of vulnerability. I need your help. No, you don't, I replied, keeping my voice steady. You need to face the consequences of your actions. Please, he begged. I've lost everything. I can't do this alone. You did this to yourself, Derek, I said firmly. Goodbye. With a click, I ended the call. I felt a mixture of pity and relief. Derek had to learn the hard way that actions have consequences. Emily reached out to me as well, saying she had cut all ties with Derek. I'm so sorry for being part of this, she said softly. I didn't know. It's not your fault, I reassured her. Derek was the manipulator. You deserve better. She thanked me, and we parted ways, both of us seeking new beginnings. As for me, I threw myself into my work and hobbies. I reconnected with old friends, spending weekends exploring the city and enjoying simple pleasures. Life felt lighter, freer. One evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my new apartment. Sophia, John, Mike, and even David came. The air was filled with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the tension and deceit I had lived with. Sophia raised her glass. To Laura for her strength and courage. May this be the beginning of a beautiful journey. We all clinked our glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude. These people, my true family, had stood by me through the toughest times. As the party wound down, David pulled me aside. You've done something incredible, Laura. You've taken back your life. I couldn't have done it without all of you, I said, glancing around the room at my loved ones. Thank you. He smiled. Here's to moving forward, then. In the days that followed, I saw Derek once more. He was a shadow of his former self. Sitting alone in a cafe, staring blankly at a cup of coffee. Part of me wanted to offer solace, but I knew it wasn't my place. Instead, I walked past, my head held high. This was my story now, free from his toxic influence. With renewed strength and an open heart, I embraced my independence. Each step I took was a reminder of my journey, from betrayal to empowerment. Life was mine to shape, and I was determined to make every moment count. I had faced darkness and emerged stronger, ready to build a future filled with light and possibility. As I continued on my path, I knew one thing for sure. I was unstoppable. Moving into my new, cozy apartment felt like stepping into a fresh chapter of my life. I decorated it with pieces that reflected my taste, each detail carefully selected. A sense of peace settled in, a stark contrast to the chaos that had dominated my world. One morning, while brewing coffee, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an old friend, Rachel. Hey, Laura, just heard about everything. Can we catch up? Lunch? I smiled, glad for the reconnection. Sounds great. Let's meet at the bistro by the park. At lunch, Rachel listened intently as I recounted the betrayal and the fallout. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Wow, Laura, that's intense. How did you manage? With a lot of help. My friends and family were my support system, I replied, warmth flooding my chest as I thought of them. And now, I'm just focusing on living the life I want. Rachel grinned. Good for you. You always had a fire in you. Reconnecting with old friends became a regular part of my routine. Each meeting brought laughter, memories, and a sense of healing. I was rebuilding, piece by piece. One day I received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hello? Laura, it's Emily. Emily, is everything all right? I asked, surprised. She took a deep breath. I just wanted to say thank you. Senior, for showing me the truth about Derek. It was hard, but I've moved on, started a new job, meeting new people. That's wonderful to hear, Emily. You deserve happiness. You too, Laura. Take care, she said before hanging up. Hearing Emily's progress felt like another weight lifted. The threads of Derek's deceit were finally unwinding, freeing us both. My freelance web development business began to flourish. I took on projects that excited me, each one a step toward professional fulfillment. The freedom to choose made all the difference. One afternoon, as I was finalizing a project, there was a knock on the door. It was David, holding a bottle of wine. Thought we'd celebrate your newfound independence, he said with a smile. We sat on the balcony, the city skyline glowing as the sun set. So, Laura, how does it feel to be here after everything? I sipped my wine, feeling the cool breeze. It feels freeing. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until it was gone. David nodded. You've come a long way. What's next for you? I'm focusing on me now, my work, my passions, maybe even travel once things settle. He raised his glass. Here's to new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass with his. As the months passed, I explored old interests and discovered new ones. I took up painting, joined a book club, and even tried my hand at cooking exotic recipes. Life was full, vibrant. One evening, while shopping for groceries, I bumped into an old colleague, Marcus. We chatted briefly, catching up on life. He mentioned a new tech startup looking for experienced developers. You'd be perfect for it, Laura. Interested? I smiled, feeling a spark of excitement. Send me the details. I'd love to know more. Opportunities seemed to unfold naturally, reflecting my new mindset. I was no longer bound by fear or betrayal. I was free to chase my passions and dreams. Sophia and John remained close, often hosting dinner parties that filled my weekends with joy and laughter. One evening, as we sat around their dining table, Sophia leaned over and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Laura. You've rebuilt yourself from the ground up." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a swell of gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you all. Walking home that night, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The streets were quiet, the city lights casting a warm glow. I had taken back my life, turned pain into strength, and embraced a future full of possibilities. As I stepped into my apartment, I looked around, smiling. This was my sanctuary, a symbol of my resilience. My journey had been tumultuous, but it led me here, to a place of peace and empowerment. This was my life now, authentic, self-defined, and filled with hope. I walked confidently into the future, knowing I was unstoppable.